anything else.
We don't want to know!
We're dedicated, yes.
To our favorite shows!
Oh, my circuits!
Everybody loves Hippo!
Scary Dog!
Blurson at Blursville!
Futurama!
Good evening. You are listening to a Radulich Broadcasting premiere podcast. TV party tonight. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified and not getting enough oxygen to the brain, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, he says in his sexiest horse Vince McMahon voice, is our favorite show, BoJack Horseman, brought to you by the good people at Tornante Television, Boxer vs. Raptor, Shadow Machine, and Netflix, of course. Joining me tonight on this journey through 6 seasons of this animated sitcom is the Todd to my Mr. Peanut Butter, the BoJack Horseman to my Princess Caroline, the Diane to my whoever the mouse she worked for through Crush was. Suck a dick, dumb shits. It's Robert Winfree. How do you do, sir?
I was waiting to see if you could come up with a few others to go along with. To be fair, if we're going to stick with the BoJack, I need who is the who would be the Todd to your Mr. Peanut Butter then? Because that particular duo is just dynamite.
I said you.
I don't know, did we decide on that?
Yes. Yesterday.
Okay.
When I called you BoJack the first time, you was like, I take umbrage, sir. And I not only take your bridge, but I take your front door. No, that's an Animaniacs joke. Yeah, you were nonplussed when I called you BoJack Horseman. You're like, well, I'm rather more Todd. And I'm like, well, if you're Todd, that makes me Mr. Peanut Butter.
Yeah,
and he's just going to devolve from there.
Yeah. I suppose the only issue there would be you and I don't spiral out of control the same way those two do in their shenanigans.
Well, we are not living in a sitcom after all.
Are you sure about that?
I cannot confirm nor deny that we are not living in some sort of alternate reality where we are providing entertainment in the Mojoverse, nor can I confirm or deny that this isn't the Matrix. I have not taken any pills, blue or red. All I can say is that's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more.
Fair enough.
Robert, you bitch, whine, and complain that you don't get to choose enough stuff for us to talk about.
That is accurate. Both my reaction and that I don't get to choose enough stuff that we talk about.
And my reaction to that is, stop whining, you girl. Just pick something and we'll talk about it. Because I, like a whore, always say yes.
That is not true. That is only look, that has not been your stance until Hollywood went up in flames.
That's not true. Anytime you've suggested, okay, most of the time that you've suggested things.
No, some. I will happily grant you some of the time I suggest stuff. You're accommodating.
Hell no. I almost always agree to do it, and I only sometimes drop out at the last minute.
I think you're batting. I think we're still over 50% for you dropping out, so we can't quite get to we're still at most of the time. Also, most of the stuff I choose does not fit within your only recently somewhat deconstructed notion of theme weeks.
So, that being said, BoJack Horseman ended its run at 6 seasons earlier this year, and you were like, we have to talk about this. You were very passionate about it. You were like The Wire vis-a-vis me passionate about this.
I do love this show very much.
Yes. So, not everything that you're necessarily passionate about do you say, you have to watch this, we need to talk about it. But you specifically chose this one. And I make that distinction because a lot of times you're like, what can I choose to get back at him? Or what can...
That does come up.
Or what can I choose that won't, that is something I like to talk about but won't completely piss him off. But this one, like I said, you were your version of excited about. So I want you to talk to me about that. How did we get to where you're like, you have to talk about this with me. This requires discussion.
I stumbled across BoJack on Netflix when I think its first season.
How did you know about it?
It just came up in my new releases tab. Like, I'm scrolling down through Netflix, new releases, BoJack Horseman. I went, huh. And I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it right away because I kind of went, eh.
I was gonna say, on the surface, I can't see what the appeal of this. Will Arnett, Alison Brie, Amy Sedaris, animated.
I knew nothing of the actors involved.
Okay.
First of all, which in all fairness, probably saved my decision to watch this, because if I had seen Will Arnett, I would have run screaming in the other direction. I cannot stand almost everything that man does. That said, he is, and we'll get into BoJack in a minute more properly, but he is brilliant here.
Yes.
I think I watched the first episode on either a blind recommendation on Twitter. Someone else I follow said it was good, or I kind of figured I'll take a flyer on. It was kind of again, we're going back in time, 5 to 6 years here. Actually closer to 7, because they split the last season in 2 parts. And Netflix had not quite yet at that point diluted all of their goodwill in terms of their original content. And look, that's a decision they made. And in some respects, it's working out for them. They are appealing to a lot broader audience. It just means that you, as a consumer, have to be more selective about what you watch.
Right.
At the time, I was much more willing to take flyers with their original content. So I took a flyer on the first episode. And I wasn't hooked right away, but it was late. I was kind of like, all right, let's see where this goes. I was in a binging mood. And I got through the first few episodes, and I was almost bizarrely compelled, because I wanted to, these are terrible people, by and large, and that's made abundantly clear very quickly. But there's a lot about this show that just ticks the boxes about stuff I personally look for. The dialogue is very quick. Means you have to pay attention, which I like. I like shows that reward me for paying attention. The humor is rapid fire is not really the entire right word.
It's not quite sports news. Was that the name of it?
I don't know.
It's Alan's. Good God. Keep going.
Okay, point being, the humor is rapid fire, but it's not, blistering. A lot of the humor is dialogue related. It's a lot of great wordplay. I love, intelligent wordplay, and this show is full of it. There's a lot of great visual humor. Some of the best gags in this show are sight gags.
Hang on, it's not Sports Night rapid fire, but it comes close. There we are.
Fair enough. I haven't seen the show in question, so I can't.
It is unending rapid fire dialogue. Everybody is the wittiest person on earth, and they never stop talking.
There's a few, especially the first couple of seasons. Later, they would tone that down a little bit. To good effect, I think.
Yes. Well, I was more talking about Sports Night, and then to a lesser degree the Newsroom. But yeah, BoJack Horseman isn't nearly as bad.
I love that there is no laugh track. I hate laugh tracks. I genuinely hate them. They are one of the banes of my television viewing experience. Have you ever... I know there's a few people that have done this, but Mark, you have on occasion espoused the virtues of crap like The Big Bang Theory or How I Met Your Mother.
I have.
Have you seen some of the people who will edit them in such a way that they cut out all the laugh tracks?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
There's people who will take, say, an episode or a clip.
Okay.
And they will just cut away the 3-second pauses for laughter between every other line of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
They just remove them. it is like one of the best experiences you can ever have about just how stupid those shows are.
Okay.
So again, if you ever have time and the inclination, look, again, there's a few of them that you can find that are just, hey, here's this clip from, again, The Big Bang Theory, and I removed the laugh track. So, and again, some of them will like filter it purely auditorily, so from a purely audio standpoint, so everyone's standing around for 3 seconds doing nothing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, Family Guy kind of made a joke about that.
Well, the other ones that do it will cut the segment entirely and just kind of re-edit them together. So no one says anything that makes sense. And bear in mind, I don't mean that they are taking liberties with the dialogue, but so much of how the human beings interact is built around, hey, laugh track, that when you realize how heavily they lean on that, it's comically bad. Like, it is just the worst. So I hate laugh tracks. I really, really do. So this show doesn't have one. It lets you find your own humor, which is great. It also, as a show, as it goes on, it is, I think, the best representation of depression that has ever been put to television. And you can put air quotes around television because we're talking Netflix if you want. You know what I mean. BoJack is a horribly, horribly depressed character. But he's not... The way most television portrays depression is the people that can't get out of bed... most of them are teenagers, and they're usually listening to Nirvana or The Cure.
I wouldn't say Nirvana. But Kristen Stewart in, I believe it's the second Twilight movie, where the camera's spinning around her as the seasons change, and it's like... it's implied that she like never gets out of that chair because she's depressed that her vampire lover has gone away.
Yeah, there's a little of that, and if you watch network television, especially if you've ever seen any of the crappy tween-light CW stuff, they try to throw in a depressed character, put air quotes around that because they don't get it. And this is not to say that there aren't people who are just horribly depressed and physically can't get out of bed. I know that happens, but there's when it comes to how people choose to write and act depressed characters. For some reason, they all go one note. And I don't know if it's because it's too hard for them,
I think it's
what.
I think it's a combination of things. Real quick, one, first of all, I think Hollywood very much struggles with the idea of mental illness, just in general.
They struggle with mental illness the same way they struggle with computers.
Yeah, they don't really know how it works. They know they've experienced it in some way, shape, or form. But then the other side of that is there's always a studio note, an executive, or both that says, broad strokes, people, we're doing this for the widest possible audience on the dumbest possible stage. You need to make this as bright and colorful and stupid and broad as humanly possible. And what BoJack Horseman does is it takes the very real, very human experience of a wide range of emotion, from depression to happiness to manic, and says, but this is what it's really like, at least as far as I know, and from what I've seen. And it doesn't assume your audience is a fucking moron.
Yeah, I think if you want me to boil down why I really... Again, there's a lot of nuance to BoJack, and we're going to talk about a lot of it. But if you want, I think, kind of like the elevator pitch, the one-sentence thing about why I like this show, it does not insult my intelligence.
You can like something but not feel the need to talk about it. You wanted to talk about this. You wanted to talk about this with me. So 50 words or less. Why?
Well, I thought you would. And bear in mind, when I say enjoy the show, I don't mean, the same way you enjoy other, like, popcorn affair. I thought you would enjoy this show because there is stuff to talk about.
Yes.
This is a very deep, very meaty project. I wanted to talk, so there's that. I like talking with different people about different things, and I think you are the correct discussion partner for the material that I want to discuss about when it comes to this show. I mean, if there's other things about, other shows that I want to talk about, there's other people I would rather have discussions with. When it comes to talking about this television show and again, some of the mental health aspects, some of the writing aspects, the humor, the absolutely wonderful biting sarcasm, this show shoots everybody.
Yeah.
And it is glory. Like, the closest you get to that, if we're talking more like mainstream television products, would be South Park. And I think in all honesty, BoJack's satire is superior to South Park's.
Oh, it's different. South Park is like the one last bastion of true political satire. This satire is the human condition, the human experience. It's two different kinds of things here. It's kind of like the difference between, like, For Better or For Worse and Bloom County.
Okay, that's true. Fair enough.
Okay. Go ahead.
So again, I think you and I would have the best possible discussion about this one. And and as a bonus, if you wound up hating it, then I could make you talk about something you disliked actively, and you could feel the shoe could be on the other foot for a podcast.
I didn't hate it. There are characters I don't like. Let me say this. I like a show that deals not directly with mental illness. Like, there's a show that was like In Treatment that one of my cohorts was like, oh my God, I love watching In Treatment. I don't want to go home and do more work.
Yeah.
Okay? I go home, and when I'm not dealing with my fantasy, my media is my means of escaping the garbage world I have to deal with. So I don't want to watch necessarily shows that deal directly in a very straightforward way with mental illness. A show about mentally ill people involved in living their lives is more appealing to me. I still don't know if I would have watched this show unless you were like, hey, you should watch this and we should do a podcast about it. I'm not unhappy that I did. And there were legitimate belly laughs at times. There were also a lot of, this is a chore, I fucking hate BoJack.
And let me say this, and I mean this as an absolute compliment in comparison. There's parts of like Breaking Bad that are the same way.
Yeah,
that are very uncomfortable to watch.
Sure.
And I don't mean that because they are badly constructed or badly done. I mean that because they are done exceptionally well. There's the more that a piece of media, of fiction, can cut really close to reality like that. That's when for me, that's when it gets uncomfortable. I mean, I think the most uncomfortable I ever was watching Breaking Bad was the essentially intervention they all staged for him to try and convince him to get treatment. Mm-hmm. And that might seem like an odd thing, considering some of the other stuff that goes on in that show. But that whole thing felt unbelievably real. Like, watching that feels almost like grossly voyeuristic.
If I may have you indulge me for a moment in the audience, longtime audience of this podcast, the season 6 opener of The Wire, where everything has gone to hell because they've had to throw millions and millions of dollars into the black hole that is the Baltimore school system. And so they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the police department, after being made all manner of promises, has completely fallen apart. And then there's McNulty, who gave up his cush position as a beat cop, where he was happy, and he was with a woman, and he was being a father to her kids, and things were working out, and he was finally at peace, is drawn back in only to be fucked once again by the system that is utterly cruel and unfair. And the entire first episode is things happening to McNulty because of all of that cause him to just snap, basically. stage a murder scene that looks like a serial killer had been afoot, grossing out Bunk and going, "We have to alert the media. There's a serial killer afoot." And Bunk's like, "Well, you've now crossed the line that even I can't follow you." And I bring that up only to say, like, McNulty's had his ups and downs as a character, but he had enough charisma to where you would cheer for him. And then you see him do what he does in that first episode of season 6. And even though you can relate in the sense of, here is a man who has been utterly let down and betrayed, it's still gross to see him do what he did. And I don't mean gross like yucky. I mean like horror. Like gross like the way everyone seems to use the word now. Terribly unpleasant. And devoid of personal goodness. And that's kind of, where I got with BoJack a lot of the times, where like I would watch this and I would go, okay, my problem with a lot of the show and its titular title character is this is yet another show where the hero is a shitty person, and the writers I felt like a lot of times the writers were like, cheer for the shitty person doing shitty things because it's funny. And I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like shitty people being shitty. And what the strength of the show is that in that there's a great textured, vibrant exploration as to why he's shitty, how that shittiness affects other people, and then ultimately what it does to him and the journey he has to go on and keeps going even as the show concludes. So while a lot of it makes me feel uncomfortable, in that, again, I don't particularly like cheering for shitty people, I think the world that it creates is worth hanging on to and seeing through to the end.
Yeah, I agree with you about that, and I think what saves my enjoyment of the show, despite there's a lot of shows where that characteristic of just terrible people being terrible becomes just it's too much. I think what saves BoJack is the more the show goes on, the more it explores the other characters around. Like, if this were only BoJack all the time, I don't think I could have stuck with it.
Yeah.
But it explores the rest of the world as it relates to him. And the show's not afraid to... how do I say this? If this show were on... I mean, I hate to say network television as a perpetual... hang on. As a perpetual pejorative. If this show were being done by people who were out to simply make the most money, you know what I mean? Like, if this were purely a commercial project, they would have made BoJack much... Like, he still would have been a terrible person in a lot of ways, but this show is not afraid to show not only that he's a terrible person, but it does kind of, on multiple occasions, point the finger at the audience a little bit and go, and you're cheering for this guy to be terrible when you should be cheering for him to get better.
Yeah.
And I think that degree of awareness of not only the character but the audience is a big part of why I was able to stick with it, because there's a couple of very key turning points when I think other shows would have gone out of their way to maintain the status quo. And this show decides to instead go other directions, to, again, the eminent credit of all parties involved.
Let's get into... I guess we'll have to break this down season by season.
We can go season by season if you want. We can go by character. How about this? Let's do a quick season synopsis for each of the seasons. and then any of the other like overarching themes that we want to talk about briefly as it pertains to them, and then we can kick around some of the more series wide stuff.
Well, the first season does a lot of world building. It sets up the premise that he's a somewhat past his prime former TV show actor. As the
outro song will tell us at the end of essentially every episode, back in the 90s, I was in a very famous TV show.
Indeed. And so he's nostalgic for like the height of his fame. You meet the characters along the way. The first season deals with, in an attempt to rehabilitate his image, make him relevant in the public consciousness, he is writing an autobiography, and because he is utterly incapable of this project, but he knows he needs it as a battery to put life back into his career. His publisher hires him a ghostwriter, and so here we meet Diane. And if we go character by character, I have a lot to say about Diane, because if anybody warranted sympathy from me in this show, it was her. In the sense that I related to her struggle.
Okay, I agree with you, and I think one of the great things about Diane, and I'll be very brief here because we can get more into this later. Initially, Diane is essentially a purely sympathetic character.
Yeah.
The more the show goes on, there are plenty of times when she winds up as, because she is a fully fleshed out character, not a caricature. There's plenty of times when she's in the wrong, when she's the heel for a moment, so to speak. And again, there's not a lot of shows that will play around with that kind of dynamic, and this one does.
I saw a lot of comparisons in what I was reading about the show to Daria, and, well, for one thing, she's a full-grown woman and not a teenage girl. Where there are similarities between, the Daria character, which was an offshoot of Beavis and Butthead, to Diane, is that it almost sometimes sucks being really smart and being able to read between the lines and seeing the corruptness around you, and being somebody who gets fired up about it and want to vocalize and do something, and you're surrounded by people who either don't see it or don't care, and so you seem like a nagging crazy lunatic. Because that this shouldn't things like this should not happen, and that there is opportunities to do something else about it, but no one's with you. And you're surrounded by people who have the cult of personality and the charisma to push people to make change, but they never push them in the right direction. And so nothing makes you feel more alone in the world than that.
There is truth to that, and I think the other thing about the Diane character that I like is there's certain of her causes that she attaches herself to that are absolutely worthwhile and deserve the kind of attention and change she's trying to bring to them. She also, for a period of time in the show, will latch on to anything. So she winds up taking up the cause of some genuinely stupid stuff.
So a lot of the first season is Diane and BoJack kind of hanging out as there's either stuff happening around him that she's taking down, or he's telling her stories from his life, and she's composing a narrative.
We meet Todd.
Todd.
Because Todd Chavez is the hero we all need. I am joking, but...
Todd Chavez is sort of the Dirk Gently's holistic detective of this story. He's just sort of ass backwards falling into all kinds of good stuff with zero effort.
Todd is... Todd is another character that begins very much as this... If you just watch the first episode and you were looking at this from purely the perspective, of...
In that first season, he's totally set up as somebody for BoJack to bounce off of. He's there to be in the room for BoJack to talk to. It's season 2 where he becomes a character.
Yeah, and he. The other thing about him, again, he's set up as, okay, this is the slacker loser, this is the Kramer, and by the time you get to season 3, that is very much, you see how wrong that is. He's still mostly comedic relief, but he's also very much, fully fleshed out. He is his own character, and he's a guy that I get a lot of sympathy for as the show goes on. When you look at some of the stuff he's dealing with and going through, because on the one hand, sure, some of it and a lot of it's his own doing. There's things he could be doing differently to kind of fix problems, but he's also just, I don't know, maybe it's purely by comparison, because he is so, most of the time, bright. And I don't mean intelligent, but he is, he's a ray of sunshine in this show a lot of the times, as especially when other characters start, when we start dealing with some of the, dark stuff that we wind up dealing with in this show. We also meet BoJack's agent, Princess Carolyn,
who, again, is someone for BoJack Horseman to kind of bounce off. She's sort of there. She's initially set up as this character that's going to have to rein him in. So there's a lot of, funny tension where BoJack wants to spiral. She's like, no, excuse me. No, the thing has to happen. You have to do the thing, BoJack, you see. You have to get these pages and you have to show up to this. So she's there as sort of this counterbalance to keep him on track.
And one of the things I like about again, all of these characters are so wonderfully fleshed out the more this show goes on. And Princess Carolyn in particular winds up being a wonderful vehicle to discuss so many things that gets... we'll talk about it when we get to the season in question, I guess, but Princess Carolyn is the giver of one of the most brutal gut punches in this series. And considering this series, that's saying something.
She, again, she's somebody who initially is there to counterbalance BoJack. As the series goes on and she starts to take on a life of her own, her character gets more developed. Everybody in this show is damaged, if not outright broken, to one degree or another. The show is about now, okay, that's our starting point. Everybody here came from a place that damaged them to one degree or another. Some more so than others. How do you deal with that and live your life? Or not, as the case may be. And so, with that in mind, she actually becomes a very interesting character towards the second half of the series.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Once she gets into her failed relationship, her quest to become a mother, you know what? I am just going to say this now because you and I have had this discussion about other movies, other properties. There's a profoundly stupid notion around writing tables, I guess. I don't know if it's writers' rooms or studio notes or what have you. I don't know who's to blame for this. But, and you and again, we've mentioned this as it pertains to plenty of other properties. For some reason, you can't currently say in Hollywood, be that movies, television, what have you, a single woman can't ask for help, right?
Right.
We talked about this before. I love that Princess Carolyn as a character winds up becoming a vehicle to absolutely nuke that philosophy from orbit. I mean, there's an entire episode, I think, it's in the last season, where she's interacting with other ostensibly single women, single mothers who no, of course I'm able to run this agency and raise my child and blah blah blah. I'm perfect. And this woman and Princess Carolyn is barely holding on by the skin of her teeth. And come to find out, well, no, I don't raise my child myself. I have nannies. I have all these other people have these unbelievable structures and systems that they've built in place to facilitate what they're doing, and they're still not doing it all. And it's nice to kind of lampoon that ridiculous trope that is going around writing now, that of course the modern woman can be all things to all people all the time. Like, bull. It is absolute bull. No one can do that.
It definitely plays with the modern expectation that, women should be able to do everything, and the unrealistic expectations women place on each other. Because I don't think most sane men, at least none that I'm aware of, and I know quite a number of married men, think their wife should do everything. I mean, I'm sure on a very base level there are some men that, trying to figure out how to phrase this. Oh, fuck it. Just want them to, take care of them. Make dinner, help me out when I'm sick, be there for me physically. And they're not giving it much thought beyond that. They're certainly not thinking on a philosophical level, you should be there for all the things. I think, and I think most sane men, most mature men, are definitely not thinking their wives should have to do and be everything. And if they do, they're not thinking it for long, because the wife's eventually going to be like, this isn't going to work. Pick up your fucking clothes. Put a load in the laundry. Go deal with your children. Something. Yeah,
so, again, I like that they use her to kind of do that. I like Princess Carolyn's, series-wide arc.
She also has a fun way of delivering dialogue. The dialogue in the show has a lot of, witty give and take, but she does almost like a rhyme scheme at times.
Yeah, I think she actually mentioned it at some point. That's her mnemonic device. She can remember a bunch of different stuff all sequentially like that. So, yeah, she has a bunch of little rhyming things she will find, little plays on words to help keep straight in her own head what I'm doing next, who has to be where, etc., etc.
Then we have Mr. Peanut Butter, who...
Oh, Mr. Peanut Butter.
So Mr. Peanut Butter is the new BoJack Horseman. He's the toast of the town. He's the new hot sitcom actor.
No, that's not true.
Okay, go ahead.
He and BoJack were contemporaries in the 90s.
I got the impression that he got the show after, and that, at least at the time that the show takes place, he's still relevant in getting gigs.
He is slightly more relevant in getting gigs, but that's more to do with his personality and work drive and his baggage relative to BoJack's.
Okay.
Both of their shows, I mean, that's one of the reasons BoJack doesn't care for him very much to begin with, is a lot of his perception of Mr. Peanut Butter is, oh, you were on that show that was a ripoff of mine. Yours started the year after mine came out, and
so it's something along the lines
you're trying
of
to cash in.
A growing pains and a family ties kind of a thing?
Yeah. They're running concurrently, and then they both get canceled right around the same time. Mr. Peanut Butter just continues to be an exuberant person, full of life, liking work, and BoJack is interested in booze and pills and stealing the D from the Hollywood sign.
The thing about Mr. Peanut Butter is he's a very simple guy. He's happy. Almost perpetually so. He wants everybody around him to be happy, and he's the person a lot of smart people look at and go, sometimes I wish I could just be like you. Just blissfully happy and stupid. And and he may not actually be intellectually stupid, but he is not thinking deeply about the state of the universe and all of its corruption. He's just living his best life. And he's not really plugged in or worried about the stuff that has little to nothing to do with him. And I think the best example of that is a couple of seasons in when he's running for governor. And he's running for governor because it's a gig he got.
Yeah, he falls backwards into that. Like, he just accepts on a whim and then just...
Literally, it's a job. It's a job, and the key to understanding Mr. Peanut Butter is he desperately wants to be liked, but he makes himself likable. So it's easy to like him. That's kind of the Faustian bargain. He's like, I will be a big ol'... I mean, and he's like a golden lab.
He is like, yeah, I mean, he is either a golden retriever or a yellow lab. I'm not sure which.
The yellow lab.
He's a yellow lab. Anyone who's ever been around that type of dog knows what they are. They're great dogs. And he is that.
So he, he doesn't bring anybody down around him. He loves with grand gestures. He tends to want to surround himself with people who are fun and living in the moment and are not thinking too deeply about the state of the world. And that's kind of Mr. Peanut Butter. And by the way, the whole thing about him running for governor was they wanted somebody who was easy to manipulate. And he's like, yeah, great. Woof. He's a lot of fun. But he works great in contrast to BoJack, who is depressed and very much is a very smart character. And is very much...
BoJack is unbelievably aware of what's... Like, you mentioned that Diane is kind of the character that kind of shows off that it sucks to be smart sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
The same is very true of BoJack. He just manifests his intelligence differently.
Well, he's very perceptive, but he's also very narcissistic. He's the kind of character that may be staring directly at you, but isn't listening to a word you have to say because he does not care, and you are not nearly as interesting as he needs you to be. Again, something I can personally relate to.
That is true. I mean, BoJack's... I think one of the things I find interesting about him from a psychological perspective is the combination of narcissism and self-loathing, which is a really odd combination.
Yeah, I mean, narcissist, you believe yourself to be the most important, most bestest person in any given room. It's almost like he is aware of how gifted and talented and how smart he is. And he knows that lined up against an average of 10 other people, he will more often than not be the brightest person in the room. However, he also hates himself because he's grown up with two parents who did not love and nurture him.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting psychological cocktail to kind of process. Let's see. I think those are the main characters from season 1, which again is mostly about the writing of his autobiography, some of Todd's shenanigans, because classic Todd antics.
This is a classic Todd mess around.
Yep. Come on. These were classic Todd shenanigans, but you wouldn't know that because you kicked me out of the house 5 years ago.
It ends with Diane finishing the book, and it's very revelatory. It's not what BoJack wanted. BoJack wanted...
He wanted a fluff piece.
Yeah, he wanted a fluff piece that sort of exalts him and absolves him of his nefarious ways. And that's not... And she wrote a very biting, very clear picture of who and what he is. But of course people can relate to that, and so the book is successful. And it gets him working. The second season, I believe, it deals with him now with his newfound fame. He wants to do... This is the Jim Carrey thing. I was known for comedy, but I want to do a drama. So this is mostly dealing with him doing Secretariat, which is a biopic about a racehorse.
Yeah, it deals a lot with that and his interplay with the director. I think season 2 is the one that has one of my favorite episodes from this show which takes place entirely underwater, and is almost I think there's like 2 lines of dialogue at the beginning of the episode, and then 1 right at the end. The rest of it is devoid of spoken word.
Okay, one of the things that makes BoJack Horseman the show great is it's not afraid to take chances with the medium and presentation. So you have an episode where it's all, it's dialogue free, and he's dealing in an environment where he's underwater, and how that affects the show. So that's an exercise, and that's fun. There's another episode, and I think the 5th or 6th season, it's the 5th season, where his mother dies, and we'll talk about her shortly. His mother dies, and the entire episode is his monologue, where he's giving a eulogy.
Yeah, it is a brilliant episode, and again, it's one of you hit the nail on the head. I love that this show is willing to experiment with what they can do with the medium, and the majority of television these days is unbelievably safe, and so I like the fact that this show takes risks like that.
So talk to me a little bit about the underwater episode. Kind of flesh that out. What specifically about an episode dedicated entirely to the silence and just having to do 22 to 30 minutes of straight visual? What piqued your interest about that?
Well, again, I like shows that reward you for paying attention. I don't like my intelligence insulted. I don't like, being mocked for actually kind of trying to pay attention and make sense of the world that I'm supposed to be spending time in. This is one of the reasons I think I still can't get into Star Wars on any sort of appreciable level. Everything they do feels like they are insulting the intelligence of their audience. You were paying attention when we talked about this. Nope. Oh no, all that dialogue, all that exposition. Yeah, nope. Oh, that thing that we spent, a whole movie talking about. Nope, not a thing. It is insulting as someone watching the consuming that property to sit through. And lest I be accused of unfair favoritism, because I'm not a Star Wars guy to begin with, it's a big problem I have with huge chunks of The Simpsons. They seem to get annoyed with their audience for paying attention, and I don't like that. So again, something that rewards you for paying attention. Also, the story that they're able to tell through a purely visual medium. This story that episode in particular is all about BoJack trying to find the original director of Secretariat, and apologize because his behavior basically got her fired. And he's trying to find her in this underwater city and make amends, try to bring her back on the project, I think. Forgive me, it's been a while since I've seen the episode in question. And his growing desperation as that episode goes on, he can't speak. He can't convey anything verbally, so they have to express that to you visually. It's also there's an episode of, I think, the 4th season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is not my favorite show, but there was a criticism levied at that show, I think, after the 3rd season, that the only saving grace it had was the dialogue. And in response, in the 4th season, Joss Whedon winds up constructing an episode, I believe it's called Hush, that is done entirely in silence. And it's probably the only redeeming episode of that entire season. Season 4, as with Season 4 of every Joss Whedon project that goes that long, is a train wreck. So I liked that. I liked their little moment of reconciliation as he's trying to write something on a piece of paper. He's written out his apology and what he wants to say, and then goes to give it to her, and it's been washed out by the water. And I also like a good, final kind of kick in the balls, if it's funny. So the fact that all of this has happened and then somebody walks up to him, presses a collar on the underwater breathing device they all have, and then can speak to him. Like, hey, buddy, get out of the road. I like all that. That episode also features... sorry, not that episode. That season features the episode where BoJack... They're filming this scene with where Secretariat is supposed to break down, and BoJack tells... the director, I can't cry in front of people.
Oh, I loved it. This is the scene where basically he realizes he can't act. Or he's been so profoundly affected by acting on a sitcom that he's lost his range of emotion. So, he's delivering everything with, a big toothy smile.
Yeah, there's some of that. And then the director, to her credit, finally kind of gets him to a better place, to a place where he can find some range. And then, the big penultimate bit here is Secretariat is supposed to break down. I believe this is not too long before the character... The Secretariat in this world committed suicide. And this is not too long before the character does that in the movie. And he's supposed to break down, and BoJack, and this goes back to some of his childhood issues, he can't cry in front of people. His mother, beat into him that that's a sign of weakness and it will not be tolerated. And it's still something he can't overcome. They wind up getting a shot and a take that works for the moment without him crying, and then he just immediately walks outside where he can be alone, sits down, and just sobs. And it's a very affecting scene for me. For not the most of this show, but you have this guy, your job requirement, your ability. Seeing other people in emotional distress like that it's a difficult thing, but imagine for just a second, Mark, if you were around a human being who couldn't cry in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
That is an odd thing to remove from your ability to interact with the world. And seeing that kind of put out like that, I liked it. I really did. I thought it was just kind of like a low-key, heartbreaking moment.
One of the characters between the first and second season who's sort of in and out is Sarah Lee. She plays Sarah Lynn, sorry. Sarah Lynn, who plays the youngest daughter on the show, this is kind of an analog for Miley Cyrus.
The reality is any child actor can fit into what happens to her. There are so many of them that wind up in that position. It is unbelievably tragic.
I think of Miley Cyrus because that's the most recent one that I'm aware of, where you have this child star who then, in order to sort of break away from the image of child star and make herself relevant, become sort of a sex pot, at least in public. What she is in real life, who knows? I don't pretend to know the real Miley Cyrus. But Miley Cyrus has gone out of her way to portray herself as an overly sexualized human being because it is taught to many a young woman that if you want men to pay attention to you, be sexy. Represent sex in some way. And so she does, and she sort of does so gleefully. At least her public image is one of purposely sort of turning her back on her innocent youth or youthful portrayal and sort of embracing this, again, sex pot character. And, she's taken a role in Black Mirror, and she's done some other stuff to where you're look at me, I'm grown up Miley Cyrus. I haven't the foggiest clue if she was ever actually offered alcohol as a young kid. That's more, Drew Barrymore famously was a child star who I think was into drugs and alcohol, and she had to go away for a while, and she had a career resurgence when she cleaned herself up there for a bit. She had a long run of movies, as a matter of fact. She was very much in the public eye. I don't know what Drew Barrymore's doing these days.
Not the Santa Clarita diet anymore.
Yeah. So there's a lot. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of space in between and after Drew Barrymore, Miley Cyrus, and whoever the latest one to, I don't know, Dove Cameron maybe.
Well, I mean, to be fair, again, this is not something that affects only female child stars. I mean, you think about River Phoenix, for example. The number of child stars that wind up just with ruined or just, I mean, poor Edward Furlong, who's still like, I was surprised when I found out he was still alive. Given some of the rough stretches he went through. So it's a very, very common thing. And yeah, they use her to talk a little bit about that in this show and to her all the way through to her demise.
Yeah, so when we meet her, she's sort of given herself over to partying hard with drugs and alcohol. And I think at one point she cleans up of what becomes a major contention of the show. Bone of contention is the cycle of BoJack Horseman being her sort of devil on her shoulder. Without, I don't know if he's nefariously, like, malevolently trying to bring this girl down. It's almost like he can't help himself. She looks up to him, or had looked up to him. He was kind of in real life, kind of a parental figure. And
considering how absolutely useless her mother is.
Yeah, he, as is pointed out in the final season, I think, uses his power over this girl to make her a party girl because that's what he needs. He needs people to party with, to make him forget about his own stuff. And so on the set, as a youngster, she's given alcohol, and later on, after she's cleaned up, he gets her heroin, and then she dies of an overdose. And it becomes a major sticking point to the last 2 seasons of the show.
Yeah, and again, Sarah Lynn does kind of like bop in and out of the series up until, again, she winds up overdosing.
Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, like I said, season 2 deals mostly with the making of Secretariat. And I think in that season, now Diane's written the book, and I think there's a lot of the stuff with Diane is her looking for a gig. So I know for a couple of seasons she's working for Crush. And the sort of the funny thing there is, one, it's these modern companies where every time she, like her desk is like a standing desk, and it's always something different. It's like on a yoga mat or a treadmill or something. And of course, all the young chippies around her can manipulate this office and this culture with no problem, and she is both physically and mentally sort of a tangled mess trying to deal with it. But the other thing is she wrestles with journalistic integrity. She wants to write articles about things that mean something. She's that yellow dog journalist that I think a lot of people go into journalism and aspire to be. However, we're living in a world where, and it's so funny. So at work, when I'm bored, I'll go on the internet and I'll read the news. Now, a lot of stuff is nanny blocked, so basically I can only look at whatever the web browser, the news feed allows me to see. And they're not kidding when they say, amidst the collage of news articles and pictures is an advertisement masquerading as news. So, coronavirus kills 5 people today. Basketball canceled for the near future. 10 ways to clean your home with a lemon. Hey, wait a minute. That's not news. You know what I mean?
I absolutely do.
So she's sort of caught in this world of she needs a job, she needs to be paid for her craft, and she wants to write, but in order to get paid, she occasionally has to write garbage because garbage is what
it's what people pay attention to.
They use the word clickbait, and that is openly talked about in this office with her mouse boss, who I think is one of the funnier characters. Diane, I love your youthful enthusiasm, but I need you to write things that people will read.
Yep.
It's brilliant. There's that. I don't remember what happens with Princess Caroline in the second season. I know at some point...
I think season 2 might be where she breaks from her agency to start her own.
Yeah.
Like at the end of it.
Yeah, I want to say like her and another agent who she thought was
Rabinowitz, the rabbit.
Right. they were going to get together and start their own agency, and then he ends up staying, and his wife ends up having, like, a litter of bunnies.
I mean, they're rabbits.
Indeed. By the way, can we just talk about the aesthetic of the show?
Sure.
So, these are anthropomorphic, straight walking, talking animals. And some of the visual gags on this show are pretty hilarious. Like, the way they... Like, the horses and most of the bipedal, quadrupedal mammals look okay as anthropomorphic, humanized beasts. But when they get to, like, the fish, like Cindy Crawfish, just as a gag, with the fish head sticking straight up, to like, how would that work in reality? But my favorite one, because I love the design, but I also love, like, you have to understand, at the time that I was paying a lot of attention to cable news, Keith Olbermann was the devil. He was just the worst person on TV as far as I was concerned. Occasionally I would watch his show and I'm like, my God, who thought this was a good idea? And so going into it, I have only hatred more for Nancy Grace because of her coverage of the Chris Benoit thing than I do for Keith Olbermann, who I just think is terrible. But he's hilarious on this show. You know which one he is?
Yeah, he's the whale.
Yeah, he's the news anchor who is the whale, and he's so goddamn funny. And the way they do whales on the show, because him and there's like another character, this giant whale head on this like stick body. It's hilarious. It's basically they shoved a tail into a pantsuit, and the rest of it's just all head.
Yep. And they play around a little bit with the angles that he is shown at. So some of the times he's looking straight on. Most of the time he's in profile. And then occasionally you get a straight on view, and it borders on nightmare fuel.
There's cutesy things that are done. Like there's a lot of stuff, like, you know, Robert talked about, it rewards you for paying attention. If you're like on your phone and you're watching, you miss a lot of sight gags. For example, a frog in a suit quickly hopping across the road.
There's one scene when a bunch of scavengers observe a person throw a bagel at a trash can and miss, and they all pause in brief like horror, and then stare at each other like the end of Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
At one point, there's like an outdoor shot before they go to the. It's an exterior shot of a house before they go interior, and you see like a dad with his babies in a jogging stroller, and it's an exhausted dad who just looks like beat tired, and it's a stroller full of like rabbits, stuff like that.
There's I can't remember when Princess Carolyn, I think it's season 3, when she winds up hooking up with the Mousekowitz.
Yeah. And he brings her to his parents, and they have like a religious ceremony where they hate cats.
Yeah, they're just horribly racist.
Yeah. And it's funny because they don't really play around. Like, the animals and the humans are intermingling like they've been doing this for hundreds of years. And it's all fine and very normal. You know, Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter are a couple. BoJack Horseman and Princess Caroline, who is a cat, are a couple at one point. Todd eventually is in a asexual relationship with a rabbit.
Lest we also forget he is with a salamander at one point.
Yeah, that's right. And so it all, you know, very rarely does it get called directly into question what all this intermingling among animals means and humans. And the one episode that deals with that, you know, just sort of plays with it for an episode, is an intrinsic hatred of cats by mice in a religious sense, which is really funny to me.
I mean, the thing about that is, it's funny on this, to kind of take it on its own merits. It is funny, and at the same time, it's very easy to see. I mean, I don't want to get anyone in trouble here, but there are certain religious traditions that tend to have a bit more racism kind of baked into the mix than others.
Don't they all do to one extent or another? You know, Christians allegedly hate the Jews because the Jews killed Jesus. The Jews hate everybody because they've been persecuted by, everybody. You know, it just goes on and on. The Muslims hate the Jews, and the Jews hate them back. I don't know if the Buddhists hate anyone. Maybe.
They both hate and do not hate everyone simultaneously, I think, is kind of how that works.
Pretty sure the Hindus hate something or someone, but the Hindus are all the way in Asia, and who knows? I don't study the hatred of religions and who they hate that closely.
So, point being, there's a lot of history of that is very real, and they don't shy away from it, and the group in question kind of tries to play it for laughs, and I liked Princess Carolyn's point when she leaves, because she's not so much. I mean, sure, she does. I think she insults them very briefly.
If she loses her patience, is what happens. It kind of
because it doesn't seem to stop.
Right.
And her point at the end of it is, I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm not saying your family is, the devil and going to hell or anything, but I am not going to deal with that.
Right. It would be like if you, as a Christian, brought a Jewish girl home or a Jewish boy home, and everyone just kept making jokes about how the Jews killed Jesus. It's like, but the Jews killed Jesus. But the Jews killed Jesus. All right, already.
At which point, you get up, you show everyone the finger, and you walk out.
Yeah, I'll show you. I'll show you a Jew killing Jesus, and you knock a cross over.
Yeah, it's more one of those things, and there's that. Princess Carolyn's relationship with, her relationship with Mouskowitz survives that incident. It's not until she miscarries that they kind of fall apart.
Mm-hmm. So that's anything else in season 2 that you want to kind of dig into before we move on?
Not off the top of my head. I think that if you haven't seen the show yet, or you potentially want to rewatch it, there is a single kind of running theme throughout the show. Well, there's not a theme. There's a thing they do. This show, because it's on Netflix, could get away with a lot more than it does. They allow themselves a single use of the F word per season. And it's always said by someone who is then about to completely divorce themselves from BoJack. I think in the end of season 2, it's the director who has had enough of him. Again, if you're kind of interested in paying attention to stuff like that, because there's always one. I don't think there is in season 6, but every other season, there's always one. And if you key into that, there's a few that when they come up, it gives you proper context for what's actually going on right there.
Okay, yeah, it's at the end of season 2 where he leaves and goes to New Mexico, which leads to yet another thing that will haunt him for the rest of the series. This is where this is sort of another love that got away. What you learn about BoJack over the course of 6 seasons is that he wasn't just sort of handed a gig, and the gig was great, and then it was over, and he's just sort of mourning the loss of his gig. He sacrifices quite a number of internal and external things in his life and being to have been successful in that show. There's a lot of Faustian bargains being made, not the least of which was getting his friend who got him the gig fired off the show.
Well, his friend is fired after being seen publicly as gay. Again, this is television in the 90s, and was a very different time and place culturally. Not saying better. I'm certainly not saying better, but his being out was seen as an issue as a liability from the network's perspective. And the network in question, the head of the network or the person in charge of the show or what have you, goes to him and says, "Yeah, you're fired." And his response is, "You can't do the show without BoJack, and he will stick up for me." And there is some truth to that. She actually does say, "I don't need you. You're not part of the secret sauce. I need the horse." And BoJack's his response is, "Yeah, BoJack and I have been friends forever. We came up together. He will stand with me and he will walk with me." And the network studio person then decides to bluff BoJack by saying, "You can stick with us or we will fire you. We will find another horse to do this. You're not that special or important." And he caves. He blinks in the face with a bluff because in fairness, he doesn't know it. He doesn't know that she's lying to him like that, without him the show isn't really anything. He is, in fact, quite vital to it. He caves, and he sells out his best friend to maintain his position. And, yeah, his friend dies of cancer. I don't think they see each other a few times before he finally dies, but they never really make up.
No, and as a matter of fact, he purposely allows himself to die not forgiving BoJack. Like, he holds that grudge to his very last breath.
Yeah.
Like, BoJack goes to make amends, and he's like, "You had my whole life, and you wait till I'm on my deathbed of cancer. And no, and I don't forgive you, and I never will." And then beep, and it's over.
Yeah,
So BoJack isn't just depressed. He's also carrying around an enormous amount of guilt.
Yeah, most of which is deserved to one degree or another. I mean, he certainly takes it to unhealthy places, but the notion that this is a character that probably should carry around a degree of feeling bad about what he has done, yeah, that's probably fair. You'd be more worried if he didn't.
So connected to that character is a female who is around at the time that they're doing comedy in the late 80s, early 90s, that leads to the Horsing Around gig, is the name of the show. And she eventually goes off to New Mexico. And BoJack, I think, after everything with the friend and Secretariat and everything, just like, there's a running theme of BoJack running away from his problems. Either he runs into a bottle or a pile of cocaine or heroin, or he physically runs to another place in the world to get away from responsibility, himself, etc. And in this particular instance, he runs to New Mexico to find the love that got away. Turns out she's married and has a daughter. And he spends months there, kind of living on a landed boat and in their driveway. And he kind of becomes adopted by this family. And he takes the daughter to prom, and of course the girl is 17, and she's smitten with old man BoJack, because what 17-year-old girl isn't smitten with a middle-aged man? And they almost have sex, except that they're caught by the mother. And later on in the series, when this comes up again, it's like, well, she was of the age of consent, which hardly matters.
Well, legally it matters. Matters a great deal.
I mean, to be or not be arrested for statutory rape, sure, but greater implications.
If we're talking about what it says about him as a person and his ethics and whatnot, no, it says nothing good.
So he's sort of hiding behind that. It's just a tad more deftly handled than the Romeo and Juliet card that is pulled out in Age of Extinction, but not much. I'm really surprised I didn't just trigger you and set you off.
I'm not sure I fully understand the reference. Okay, wait a minute. No, sorry. I think I misheard you when you said Age of Extinction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, no. I see what you're saying, and I hope you choke.
Lucky for you, I've been doing it the whole podcast.
I'm hoping... That's why I made a very realistic request of the universe in this instance.
Right. Thanks, jerk. So, you have this thing where it's like, look, he absolutely would have slept with this girl had the mother not walked in when she did. But he sort of rests on that one bit of just serendipity in the universe. She walked in when she did, so they technically didn't do anything. And she was technically of age. So, in the most literal legal sense, he wasn't doing anything wrong. But in a greater moral, ethical, familial sense, it was all wrong.
Oh, yeah. Like, nothing was above board there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I don't know how far out they wrote, but the pattern of BoJack back-asswardly taking advantage of women and then having that drawn out and confronted with when he does the tell-all interview, I think in the season 6. It's like I don't know if the writers knew that that's where this was going to end up, because there's a lot of examples that get thrown out at him when she delivers that whammy, and it's like that's over several seasons that these things all happened. Like, did they know in a writer's room that eventually, if they piled up enough of these, or the kind of like, well, it's season 6, and as we look back at the things we've had BoJack do, we have a pattern that's emerged in the writing here for his character. We should probably do something with it.
I couldn't tell you one way or the other, and
obviously,
to be fair, I will give extreme kudos either direction. Whether that was all planned out, in which case, a wonderful example of long-term storytelling, or if it was, again, at the end, we know we're wrapping up. What can we do with this character? Oh, the character itself has developed a pretty solid voice over this time, and look at this pattern. We can totally do something with this.
Yeah.
So again, the writing gets kudos either direction from me on that particular one.
So at the very least, he is, of course, thrown out of the home for having sex with this child. Nearly having sex with this child, and he eventually goes back to Hollywood to deal with the Secretariat film, and that takes us to season 3.
All right, let's keep rolling.
All right, season 3. Trying to remember what happens here.
I could pull up the wiki if it'll help.
I got it. All right, so season 3. Let's see. So Princess Caroline has her new agency. That's one of the things that's going on. I think there's an in-between bit here where Diane is actually doing social media for different stars, and so she's like tweeting for them.
Yep, that's a thing she does for a while. Like, I think it's during that time she accidentally tweets about a famous pop star getting an abortion.
Yeah. So I guess season 3 deals a lot with him promoting the Secretariat film.
Yeah, again, you have Princess Carolyn starting to get her agency up and running. I think this is the season where her relationship with the mouse falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to talk about the episode in. I think it's called Ruthie. Because this episode has, again, what I thought was one of the more brutal gut punches.
Okay, that's not this season, by the way.
Okay, that's 4?
It would have to be, because it's not 3.
Okay, I will postpone until season 4 then.
This is the season where Sarah Lynn at the end ends up getting killed. This is the season where by the end of it, Todd figures out he's asexual. This is
this is the season where Todd tells BoJack to F off.
Okay, so go ahead and talk about that, because I know that was something that was that was a big part of what you wanted to talk about.
I believe it's this season where Todd spends a chunk of it composing a rock opera.
Oh,
which is a very Todd thing to do. It's silly and a little bit self-indulgent, but, you kind of just go, all right, sure, let the baby have his bottle. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's something to channel his energy into. And everyone kind of laughs it off until he performs it the first time for BoJack. And BoJack realizes, no, this is actually good. Like he's in typical Todd fashion, he has fallen backwards into promotional deals and things of that nature related to this rock opera. So he could actually do something with this. It's not just a passion project. It actually kind of could mature into a money-making opportunity. This is something he could do. Like, hey, I can do something with this thing I've been doing. BoJack realizes this and then proceeds to sabotage him because he likes having Todd around and doesn't really want to let him be successful. And he sabotages it. Todd doesn't know initially that this has happened. He kind of initially just chalks it up to, well, I gave it a shot. Things didn't quite pan out. You gave me, I think BoJack gives him some advice that is, again, deliberately bad advice. And he's just kind of willing to go along with it because, I put some effort into this. I cared about it. But if it's not going to happen, then I'm not going to carry around, I'm not going to let this be an albatross around my neck, And then BoJack confesses to him, no, I sabotaged you. And Todd gets one of the few times you see Todd really pissed off.
Yeah. And
I love his monologue that he throws at BoJack after this revelation, because he absolutely calls out BoJack on so much of his BS. He tells him, I think part of the thing is, it's not enough to just acknowledge you did something bad and say that you did it and then say you're sorry. That doesn't make it better. You have to try to be better, and you're not.
Right.
And it ends with him just going like, F, man, what else is there to say?
It does play with the idea of when you become a celebrity, and BoJack just outright says it. He's like, I'm used to people just giving me everything I want. And because I'm a talented professional entertainer, people will forgive a lot of my transgressions because I am the golden goose. And how that affects how you treat people, how that affects how you think about the world. It becomes a dangerous thing because the natural progression of human behavior and psychology is that you are confronted with hurdles, you learn to overcome those hurdles, you internalize those lessons, and then you move forward in life. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so when you now have an army of people standing around you to knock the hurdles away, I mean, there's a thing that me and Melissa talk about all the time about lawnmower parents. Have you heard me talk about this?
The ones who are out there making sure the road for their children is perfectly clear.
Yes. So their children never learn how to deal with adversity, and then they grow up, and there's no one there now to knock the hurdles down in front of them, and they don't have the skill set to deal with adversity, and of course adversity crushes them. Because that's what adversity does.
Yeah, there's it's a fairly well kind of established bit of you'd think it would be, at least. There's a bit of what should be a truism in the psychological world and the child development world. You do not prepare the road for your child, you prepare your child for the road.
Right.
And what you get someone with BoJack is what happens when you stop doing that, and it's pretty ugly at times.
Right. Now the expectation is whatever I want, I'll get, and I should have, and all my problems will be solved for me, and I can just exist hedonistically, is what ends up happening in most cases. And of course, that's exactly what happened with BoJack. Which leads to a fairly great conversation that he has in The Best Thing That Ever Happened. He's rejected for a gig, Flight of the Pegasus, and a Horse and Around reboot. And so he fires Caroline as his agent after she kind of like begs him to give her 6 more months because she's depending on him to kind of get her agency off the ground. And there's a lot of give and take, and it's a really great episode. I mean, so much television is dialogue driven because television budgets are less than movie budgets. And so you can't do a lot of stunts and CGI and cool visuals or whatever, even on an animated show. You're limited. So a lot of it is setups for people to talk. And the art of the conversation, a lost one in many ways in our current society.
You are not lying.
Is fairly well represented between BoJack and Princess Caroline. Princess Carolyn. Where there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of sharing and there's tension. It isn't just two people talking. There's almost like a wrestling match happening. A lot of give and take. And then it leads to, her... There's an understanding. There's a bit of tenderness. And finally she's like, will you please just give me 6 more months? And he's just kind of... There's a beat, and he kind of looks askew. He just says, no. Roll credits.
Yeah, and I mean, to the point, BoJack is not really in a position in that particular point in the series. Like, he maybe could have given her the 6 months. At the same time, there was some real... there would be very real consequences for where he is with his career and whatnot if he did go through with that. So it's not like he's just being a jerk to be a jerk. He has to make a judgment call about his career in the situation that he's in, and you want him to give her that. You want him to give her the 6 months. You want Princess Carolyn to succeed, but it's not like what he's doing is completely beyond the pale. Yeah.
I remember this. I remember why I don't remember a lot of the details of this season. This one didn't really... The arc of this season didn't really resonate with me. So, you have the first season which kind of sets things up, and it's about the book. And then the second one is about his desire to be seen as a serious actor and all of the kind of fallout from that. This was the beginning of, I think, Todd and Mr. Peanut Butter mess-arounds.
Oh, which are so great. I mean, again, they're almost pure comedy.
Yeah.
But, man, do they give rise to some of just the best humor. I mean, it's a Mr. Peanut Butter and Todd messing around bit that leads to the creation of the sex bot that runs a major studio.
Well, it's their collaboration goes to the all-female Uber situation.
Yeah,
the sex bot is because he's in a relationship that where I think the girl that he's with. He's like, I want to make you happy, but I'm just not interested in sex. So he builds her a sex robot, which is a series of dildos on springs.
And the ability to talk dirty, of course, which is how this sex robot lands a job running a major motion picture studio. This one, they have the all-female Uber, which is a hilarious, satirization of... how stupid so many people in the, I hate to say entrepreneur arena are, but that's kind of the area we're dealing with here. So they create Uber just for women because women are more comfortable with other female drivers than they are with male drivers. So sure, we'll make an all-female Uber, and they do. It is wildly successful. And then again, wildly successful business. And they're sitting around and they kind of go, only women are using our business. That's cutting out half of the population. We really should look into doing something about this. And so they decide, sure, hey, how about male drivers? And they kill their own business with this stupidity.
Season 4... Go ahead.
it speaks to, and again, I don't necessarily mean the entrepreneur side of things, but it speaks so much to. I feel like that happens again in like writers' rooms all the time. We have this show and it's great, but it's only appealing to X. How do we broaden our appeal? Well, what if we add Schmagegi? Sure, that's great. Never mind that adding Schmagegi completely removes its appeal to, completely removes what makes it unique and different. And then you end up with something that is utterly uninteresting and falls apart because you're not doing it any better than the person who got there first.
Yeah. Season 4. That's the one I need to talk about. That's probably my favorite season.
Well, season 3, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the one that ends with him driving off and nearly killing himself. And then he winds up going to a different state to live for a while and like rebuilds a house.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Want to make sure I'm remembering correctly.
Living in the old Sugarman Ranch, and we get the flashback of what sent Grandma Horseman off the deep end, which then affected BoJack's mother, which eventually sends her off the deep end. It all starts with the death of Cracker Jack in the war, which is his uncle.
I have to bring up one of the things about this show that I love. All of these people are damaged. None of them are. They all have their own like heartbreaking parts of their story. Mm-hmm. Like when you see I think it is in this season where we get the extended flashback about BoJack's parents and how they came together.
Yeah,
and we only. There's a chunk of this that we only know from BoJack's perspective, which, okay, sure, that made for miserable conditions for a child growing up. Not debating that. But when you see where they kind of come from and how the tragedy of existence conspired to put them there, essentially, it's heartbreaking because there's almost a little bit of, you never had a chance. Like, this was never going to work. And it's almost a miracle it played out as well as it did, kind of thing. And which is, again, just tremendously tragic. So anyway, this is the season you want to go in depth about. So I apologize. I will shut up.
No, it's fine. Yeah, he at the end of the third season, he went off to go live at his grandparents' old home, which is now a ramshackle, rundown thing. And he's just sort of willing to live in squalor because of how he's feeling about himself. But of course, there's a neighbor there who's like, fix the damn door, and then he fixes the door, and they kind of develop a relationship where they rebuild the house, and I think by the end of it, he's feeling better, and then he just like knocks the house down.
Yeah, he does. It does kind of just get blown. He bulldozes it before he leaves, I think.
Yeah, much to the chagrin of the neighbor. But
it was like, well, there was some history between the two families as well that kind of gets played out a little bit there, if memory serves.
So one of the things I love political satire. I mean, I am willing to. First of all, I wouldn't say I'm apolitical, and I have strong opinions about certain political philosophies or whatever, not relevant to this show. But I stopped talking about politics. Mostly because I feel like it devolved into talking about sports, and I didn't want to have those conversations that way with people around me. Abortion is a nuanced subject. It deserves respect, and I'm either talking to people who think it's the worst thing ever, or that abortion should be handed out like candy, and there's usually a religious element to the discussion, and it's beyond stupid, and I don't want to do it. So my love of politics is still there. Like, I was almost a political science major in college for this reason.
Wow, your two options, man. You chose two career paths there that just give you no options.
I know. Well, the idea was I was going to go to law school at one point. Could you imagine?
Kind of, yeah. Look, you would be a hit with certain juries. I guarantee you. I guarantee you that.
So anyway, yeah, I have enjoyed one of the positive memories I have growing up with my parents is sitting around the table with my dad. My mother was not able to engage in these discussions. They were too far above her intelligence level. Was talking politics and talking history and sort of the intermingling of the two. My dad never talked to me like a kid. So we would talk about the news of the day, and my dad would challenge me, and we would have these really, really great discussions. You know, my dad was, and I think I've talked about this before, my dad was the guy who would invite the Jehovah's Witnesses into the house. He was the only one. And they would, with the idea that they were never going to convert him, but he was more than happy to have sort of a fireside chat about the nature of religion and the inner meaning of texts and all of that. And they did this for as long as they could before they realized, wow, we really aren't going to change his mind, and this is just an exercise in jerking off at this point. So, like, we're going to move on to somebody else now. But that was my dad, and that's the house that I grew up in. A free engaging of wits and dialogue and ideas. And because of that, I always enjoyed, until it got too stupid, talking politics. And I've enjoyed, you know, and like, it's kind of a shame that, for a variety of reasons, but I'll focus on this one relevant to the situation. I enjoy national elections because of the primary season. Because for me, that's like the playoffs of any major sport. And I enjoy it for entertainment purposes. So, relative to the show, an entire season dedicated to lampooning elections and politics was right up my alley. Like, of all the biting satire and humor in this show, this is what struck me the funniest. And the stuff with Mr. Peanut Butter being this sort of, you know, like, there was a conversation that took place amongst us in a chat about, well, if you had to run against Trump, what black woman could you find to do it? And it was not, and at no point did we discuss policy. It was, all right, how about Oprah? Well, she might be too old and maybe not as relevant. How about
Obama? If we're just talking about Oprah, not only is she as relevant anymore, there's also the fact that, you know, the school she sponsors in South Africa had that and a couple of fairly brutal sex abuse.
Yeah, she was damaged goods. She wasn't a good candidate. But my point with that was we at no point when discussing viable political opponents for Donald Trump said, who's got the best policy? That's not a factor here. Yeah, it was, and that's what they're making fun of with this.
Yeah.
You know, they outright say, like, we don't care what you think. We need you dumb and electable so that we have somebody who we can manipulate into pushing our policies forward. That's hilarious to me. The interplay between Governor Woodchuck and Mr. Peanut Butter had me crying. I was laughing so hard.
Oh, it's so funny because the woodchuck is trying so earnestly. And here's Mr. Peanut Butter just being Mr. Peanut Butter and destroying him politically. And this poor woodchuck can't for the life of him figure out what's going on.
Yeah. It's the oh god, who ran against Spiro Agnew?
Was that one of Reagan's or was that Bush?
Oh gosh, I'd have to go back and look. But I remember, like, in whatever election Spiro Agnew was running as the nominee, you know, it was like he was clearly, based on merit and intelligence, the best candidate. But he was Spiro Agnew, and he was not photogenic. The Nixon-Kennedy debate, where Nixon clearly was more apt and knowledgeable, but he was sweating on camera. Things like that.
Yeah.
To, you know, compared to, like, Jack Kennedy, who was obviously more picturesque.
You know, there's the old story about that particular debate that anyone who watched it on television thought Kennedy won. Anyone who listened to it on the radio thought Nixon won.
Right. And this season plays with a lot of that. You know, and it comes out in, you know, you have the obviously able and apt Woodchuck versus the affable and electable and good-looking, but utterly unqualified Mr. Peanut Butter, and Mr. Peanut Butter is destroying him.
Just wrecking him. And he tries... God love the woodchuck. He tries. But then he gets in that skiing accident, I think it was, and that was... Wasn't he just, like, trying to prove that something was completely safe?
Oh, yeah, no. Mr. Peanut Butter lost the election, but somehow coerces the governor to... He challenges him to a ski race. And whoever wins the ski race wins the election. And Governor Woodchuck's like, okay, they pass an amendment...
If they pass an amendment to he says, no, this is stupid. We have a process. I won. They pass the amendment, and he goes, fine, I'm a competitive downhill skier anyway.
Right. And Todd wins.
Todd wins.
He doesn't get wrecked. Todd wins, and he becomes governor.
That was so good.
At which point he resigns, and they have to have like a runoff election,
which the woodchuck wins. If memory serves.
Yeah, he'll end up becoming governor again at some point, but there's a bit there where I know they all get like Mr. Peanut Butter unwittingly becomes the fracking candidate.
Yep, he has a fracking platform. I always feel bad for people who have to defend the perfectly reasonable policy of fracking, because there's so many morons out there who are just like religious zealots about how bad it is when it's really not. The process has been going on for a lot longer than you think it has, people.
The fracking causes basically like a cave-in and an earthquake.
They all get stuck underground for like a day and a half, and their society completely... They're like, this one house becomes every post-apocalyptic nightmare you've ever seen. This is the season that ends with Mr. Peanut Butter and Diane divorcing, right?
Yes. She has to squint to find the happiness, and she gets tired of squinting, which broke my heart.
That broke my heart, too. I mean, much as I joke about Mr. Peanut Butter, and I get that guy. You've mentioned that he's a very concrete person, and being something of a concrete person myself. When Diane tells him the story about, when I was a little girl, I just wanted the Beauty and the Beast library. And his response to that is, we're going to rebuild the house anyway. I can do this. And then does it, and her response is, how dare you do something to try and make me happy? Like, I completely get where he's coming from when he's like, okay, you know what? I'm sorry I try to do nice things for you. I'm sorry I try to make you happy. I'm sorry for being me.
Now, this is the season that also, look, the send-up of politics is endlessly hilarious, and that's what made this my favorite season. But this is also where we meet Hollyhock, who is believed to be BoJack's daughter. Turns out it's his sister, his half-sister.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Hollyhock character?
I feel bad for her. I mean, she comes looking for a bit of connectivity in her life, because she's been adopted.
Yes, by a polyamorous...
Oh, God. Can I just say, I love that they make fun of that the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's been adopted by a polyamorous gay group, so her last name is like 5 names.
Yes. There's like 8 gay men all in a relationship with each other. Which, I mean, to the degree that they make fun of it, it's just out there, it's a thing, and it's an exaggeration of what polyamory tends to end up being. But
it's not that stable.
You know what? I'm not gonna spend the podcast bashing polyamory. I just, not to saying that that's what you are, but I'm not going on that tangent. This is a thing people have chosen to do. It's not something my wife and I are choosing to do. Good luck and God bless. I say that because my wife and I have had that conversation. We're like, we can barely tolerate each other. Why would we want more of us around? Marriage!
You ain't wrong.
So, but for those people who like that sort of thing, those are the kind of things that those people like. So says Jim Cornette.
Yes. Sure.
Anyway.
That great sage and eminent junkie, Jim Cornette.
What? Junkie of what?
It's a Stephen King reference. Don't worry about it.
Moving on. Hollyhock's another one of those characters kind of thrown in for BoJack to play off of. Another girl for, who is sort of innocent in the face of BoJack, and BoJack, through ineptitude, just can't help himself, tends to corrupt.
Yeah, I like Hollyhock. I like where she ends up. As a character, it feels like she gets put in a few different places just because, not really apropos of anything other than a desire to move a plot point forward, which I don't care for as a sort of general policy. But she's a good person trying to make her way in the world, just wants a little connectivity in her life, and stumbles across the train wreck of all train wrecks. But at the same time, she does wind up being a very positive force in BoJack's life. Once he's freaked out by the possibility of her being his daughter. When it's discovered, no, she's my sister, that takes a big weight off of his shoulders when it comes to expected reaction. And he wants to have a relationship with her. And he wants to be... she actually says it herself for a lot. I've got 8 dads. I don't need another one. But I could really use a good brother. And he does kind of take that to heart for a long period of time. Him trying to maintain his relationship with her is, again, one of the things that he uses to motivate himself to be a better person.
So, a couple of things here. One, this is also the season where, until she dies, BoJack's mother is living with him, which leads to the inner monologue episode. And
hang on. If you're referring to, I believe it's called Stupid Piece of Shit.
Yeah, I wanted you to kind of talk at length about that, because I feel like
this episode, that episode.
Hang on, let me set this up,
please,
because I feel like when you pitched this to me, when you elevator pitched us talking about the show, the show deals with a lot, but you focus on the depression. And you've made it a point to say it a few times now, depression isn't just moping, or the inability to get out of bed. It's the persistent negative thoughts, self-talk, that you are no good. You are not worthy of love. And you have struggled with depression. This show, and I would imagine this episode in particular, resonated with you. So I have been kind of waiting for the opportunity in this episode for you to go whole hog and just sort of talk about what the experience was of watching this episode, and and all the things you want to talk about. I'm going to sit quietly and just let you knock it out of the park.
That episode is, again, I think it is an unbelievably realistic representation of what most depressed people's inner monologues is like. It is absolutely what mine was like for a long period of time. It's so gloriously self-defeating and self-fulfilling. BoJack wants to be better, stumbles, immediately spirals down, and then kicks himself even more for spiraling. And winds up back at the bar. Just like always, because you can never do anything differently, because this is all you are, this is all you'll ever be. And why fight it? And it is... If you have someone in your life who is seriously depressed, and in this case when I mean seriously depressed, it's not just necessarily, suicidality, it's duration. Is a lot of kind of what I'm referencing here. If you want to get an idea of kind of what it's like to be inside that type of person's head, watch this episode. And you will get a bit of insight into what it's like to be essentially living with someone who is actively trying to undermine your existence. I had a lot of very well-intentioned, good-meaning people in my life who didn't know how to do anything other than say, well, choose to be positive. And again, I don't hold any blame to them. If you don't know any better, you don't know any better. If that's the sum total of what you're equipped to offer, I am eternally grateful to them for being willing to offer me anything. But you don't turn it off. It's not a switch. It's this, and it's this all the time. BoJack is my favorite representation of depression because if all you get is the surface level stuff, you see a lot of his personality disorders. You see the narcissism, you can see elements of the self-loathing, you see the alcoholism, the drug abuse, etc. But he does not fit what most people think of as depressed because he functions. So many people, and again, I blame a lot of popular media for their presentation of depression. If you showed them BoJack, they wouldn't think this is a depressed person, when in reality, he is, at various points, suicidally depressed. If you have someone in your life that is dealing with depression and you want to know a little bit of what it's like to be in that state, this episode is a profoundly useful aid in that regard. Again, not everyone's depression is the same. I certainly don't mean to say that, but if you just want an idea, this voice in your head, anytime you do anything, perpetually decrying your very existence, is about as solid a representation as you'll find. So kudos to the writers for being willing to actually discuss it this way. Kudos to Netflix for letting them show it.
So, one of the really funny episodes in this is when Diane is given a gun. Now, Diane is, your classic intellectual liberal, to where, she is vanguarding most of the liberal causes right down the checklist.
Again, some of the ones that are very well deserving of time and energy, and some of the ones that are just unbelievably stupid.
Yeah. But what's made fun of here is sort of the popularity of liberal causes in the face of people not really feeling that way. So, as an example, it is a very pop culture liberal, surface level liberal thing to not like guns. Guns are bad. And this isn't the podcast to debate the merits of gun ownership, but we are talking about the perception at a very base level among a select group of people. So the Hollywood liberal elites, very much anti-gun. But what's made fun of here, what they're having fun with, is the idea that when you give these people a gun, how powerful it makes them feel. While simultaneously also skewing things like male gaze and woke culture and Me Too. And so you have Diane who sort of, through Diane, you are seeing what women deal with from one degree or another on a day-to-day basis vis-a-vis their relationship to the male gender. Varying degrees of sexualization, mistreatment, etc. The feeling like, I believe it's said in the episode, you're only, as a woman, you're only as safe as the man allows you to be. And to the degree that that's true, I mean, are most men gonna pop off and, beat the living shit out of the woman around them? Probably not. But can most men beat up most women? Yeah. And that's the idea that they're playing with. And so she has this gun, and it's kind of the great equalizer. And it's skewed, and it's very funny, dealing with a very serious subject. And I think it deals with it with a level of insight rarely seen in a pop culture Hollywood production.
There are again, this is not the forum to debate the merits of the Second Amendment. That said, given my general worldview in politics, I'm generally speaking pro-Second Amendment. I'm not a gun-toting nut. I don't want a grenade launcher.
Why not?
Okay, let me rephrase. Yes, I want a grenade launcher.
That's much better.
I am not of the opinion that a grenade launcher should be a readily available tool.
I would agree with that.
But, okay, yes, sure, I want a grenade launcher.
Yeah, man. I totally want a fucking tank. I should never be given a tank.
That is all that is to say, most of the popular media that I consume consequently takes what I consider to be a very incorrect stance. And even if I don't disagree with it, the tenor of the discussion, the vast majority of the time, is so unbelievably stupid and condescending, and throw whatever adjective you want out there. I feel like anytime any show tries to talk about this issue, it's just stupid. They don't have the intelligence, they don't have the desire, they don't have anything related to the necessity of actually discussing it. Consequently, it becomes, again, like a wank fest. There are, in my experience to this point, a grand total of, I believe, like 3 exceptions to this rule for me, that are a show that will tackle this in some degree or another, that I do not, whether I agree with the view being espoused by the show or not, that I do not feel insulted or degraded, or, anything like that, where I feel like this is handled essentially appropriately, even if I disagree. One is an episode of The Simpsons that doesn't actually see generalized air very much, where they talk about where Homer becomes a gun owner, and they talk a little bit about what goes into responsible gun ownership. And I think the reason it doesn't get played a whole lot is that it actually does somewhat appropriately discuss both ends of the spectrum of people who are wildly irresponsible, people who are very responsible, the purposes of having gun ownership. It's actually discussed with a somewhat appropriate degree of nuance, and because of that, everybody hates it. So there's that. There's an episode of Boston Legal, which is another personal favorite show of mine, that deals with this a little bit, and again, does not really take, a giant principled stance one way or the other, and winds up having some really fun stuff that you don't really think of, fun discussions when you talk about the legal system as it pertains to gun control. But they do get some out of that one. And there's this episode where, again, they talk about, they lampoon a bit of the culture that is stupid, and they talk about what's going on with a degree of intelligence and sophistication that a topic like that desperately needs if you're going to talk about it. If you're not willing to discuss, again, I hate to say sensitive in the sense that no one wants to talk about it, but we're dealing with a material that needs nuance and discussion, and if all you have are crappy jokes and slapstick, how about you just avoid talking about this one, yeah?
Okay.
And I say that to both sides of the argument, for the record.
Before we move on to season 5, you have to talk now. You started to talk about this before, but we were in the wrong season. So this is the heartbreaking Ruthie episode.
Oh God.
So what? Just kind of real quick, set this up for me, and you can kind of talk about what it's about and then what it is you wanted to say. But why exactly did this one ping your heartstrings?
This might sound stupid because
you want a baby?
No.
No.
Look, I need to get married first.
Dude, tweaking your nipples. Move on.
I know. Sorry, one of my younger brothers got engaged not too long ago, so...
Mazel tov!
Thank you. I will make sure... He's probably going to listen to the show, so... Anyway, point being, what I think gets me about this episode is actually the setup. The setup for this episode is a very stereotypically animated sitcom flashback. We see a character in the future, and you know they're in the future because they're in space. And this is set up to be Princess Carolyn's, one of her great-great-granddaughters, I think, something, levels removed. Giving a history, giving a dissertation for one of those grade school days, pick an ancestor and tell us about their life. And it is played that way, very straight, up till the character in question, Carolyn's descendant, whose name is Ruthie. And there's a bit where Princess Carolyn she's still struggling with the aftermaths of her miscarriage. And she winds up sitting on a couch talking with, I forget who, it might be to BoJack. It would be incredibly poetically accurate to be pouring out this kind of thing to that, to him being in one of his unlistening, uncaring moods. And she says, whenever I have a rough day, I like to imagine one of my great granddaughters in the future talking about who I used to be as a person, because then I know it's just a really nice way of letting you know, hey, by the way, all we were seeing was her coping mechanism. All those little bits of hope we sprinkled around for you, it is cheese and a mousetrap, and we got you. And I hate to phrase it this way, I don't get got very often by devices like that. I bought in hook, line, and sinker into that misdirect. And it hit me square in the guts when I realized what was going on. Again, nothing that, broke me down in any sort of major way, not that I'm some kind of tough guy, but this particular button is not one of those that pushes and moves me to tears. But man, did I feel it. So it is just such a great misdirect, because every other show every show has done that episode, right? We can go down the list of, in particular, animated shows that have an episode that deals with some character in the future talking about the episode as the narrative device and the framework for the episode that we're watching. Everyone's done it, so of course they're going to do it. They're just going to twist it, and along with it, the knife that's in your back. So that's kind of why that one got me, I think.
Anything else about Season 4? Otherwise, we're going to move on to Season 5.
I think Judah gets introduced in Season 4.
At one point, I know that he's there for a while, and then he takes it upon himself to upend a deal. I guess seeing that, I think it was like a merger, and he was he sees the benefit of independence for Princess Carolyn, which wasn't his decision to make, and so she fires him. But he'll be back. Back.
I love Judah.
Yeah. Do you like Dietrich Bader as an actor?
I don't know who that is.
He was on the Drew Carey Show.
Who was he?
He was not the tall one.
Okay. No. So not Ryan Stiles. Okay. Yeah, no. I know who you're talking about now.
Okay.
Never really gave too much thought to him, in all honesty. I like Judah. He's a good person, Mm-hmm. And this is a series where that is as rare as hen's teeth. And to see just someone who is kind of at their core, he's a little bit awkward, but is just an earnest, understanding, competent, caring human being. this show needs that.
Yeah.
And Judah is a great delivery mechanism for that, especially as we come to understand his relationship with Princess Carolyn as it develops.
So season 5 deals with the making of the show Filbert, which is a streamable show that the company, What Time Is It Now, is sponsoring.
I love that so much. WhatTimeIsItRightNow.com. I can't tell you how many times I've looked around and not known what time it is right now. God bless you, Todd. You wonderful, wonderful, stupid cinnamon roll.
Which I believe Todd falls ass backwards into being the ad sales manager for, which sets up a gag later on. We talked about this yesterday, where I didn't know as the manager of ad sales, I was supposed to be selling ads.
I know, we have this show, it's a hit. But how are we supposed to? Well, why aren't we making money? We haven't sold in the ad space. I did not know that it's the manager. It's your job.
I have to say, we haven't talked a lot about the vocal performances in the show. Aaron Paul's amazing and probably is Will Arnett's Will Arnett. He's, I don't know if that's his natural speaking voice, but he's basically doing kind of Batman. And everybody else
basically doing his normal speaking voice.
Everybody else is fine. Patton Oswalt has a naturally funny voice. So the various characters that he portrays on the show, and he does, he's the Penguin a lot, but he's been other characters on the show. His voice is very distinct to me. I've listened to a lot of his comedy on Spotify, so I could pick it out when I heard it. Stephanie Beatrice, I recognized from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. There were other people here and there where I was like, huh, who is that? And then I would have to look them up. But I have to say, there's line readings, and just your general acting, and you're using your normal speaking voice. And it's fine, and it matches the character. Like Stephanie Beatrice, as just an example, who plays on this season Gina Castor.
She's Gina.
She's fine. Her voice matches that character. No problem there. Nobody's distinctly bad or is off-putting. But I have to say, Aaron Paul as Todd is probably giving the best voice performance of anybody on this show for all 6 seasons.
I think he is the most consistent. I love what Will Arnett does with BoJack as a character, but if all we're doing is talking about like you said, vocal performances, yeah, man, Aaron Paul is the man. He injects so much enthusiasm and life and believability into everything Todd does.
Well, the setup is I didn't know I was supposed to be selling ads, and he goes on to sort of rattle off what he's doing. And all this to say, what you need to know is I am desperate. I died.
Oh, I remember that gag. He's trying to sell. He is finally trying to offload the property of Filbert to an actual production studio. And yeah, he tells the story about how he didn't know what he was doing, and all that is to say, I think there's a sight gag component to that. You hear him monologuing and you see him doing it, and then you pull back and he's talking with Len Turtletub, who's voiced by J.K. Simmons, and he's just given up every bit of leverage he might have possibly had in negotiating this point.
It's really funny. I am desperate, and so I think the next time it comes up in the show, he's like, we can't not finish Filbert. We're already doing a board game, and he just rattles off all these things that they've signed on for.
Oh yeah, a board game, a spin-off.
So good. But that's an example of Aaron Paul giving this really breathy, kind of almost exaggerated, but it works for the character voice performance. So I would hate myself if I didn't bring that up.
Yeah.
So a lot of this season deals with BoJack making this show.
BoJack, he's in an interesting spot here. He's tried, and he is trying to clean up part of his life. He's not, on as many pills. He's not drinking. He's still doing these things, but he is scaling back. And then he gets into an accident and is prescribed pain medication.
Which, of course, he gets addicted to.
Because, opiates. Well, then he... I think the big turning point for that is Hollyhock shows up and has a terrible flashback to BoJack's mother, not accidentally, but unbeknownst to her, doping her with diet pills because she thought Hollyhock was a little chunky.
Which was in the previous season.
Yeah. And she throws out his pain meds, which, while he is certainly in the process of getting addicted to, he also still genuinely needs. So he goes around trying to find some, and he goes to a doctor, the same doctor who prescribed him stuff who gave him and Sarah Lynn stuff, and that doctor has reformed his ways after Sarah Lynn's overdose. And he can't really find any by the time it's all said and done, and he's frustrated because he is both addicted to and still does genuinely need these things. And he winds up promising Hollyhock that, okay, I know you're worried about me. I get why you're worried about me. I promise if I don't actually need them, I won't take them. And then he proceeds to get into a car wreck so he can get more pain pills.
So, yeah, they spend most of the season making the show. There's this bit where he's addicted to opiates.
Can I just say, I really like that scene. Because the big major point that screws up the world around him here is, while high out of his mind, he actually in the scene where he's supposed to try to strangle Gina, he actually starts strangling Gina.
Yeah, he has paranoid delusions at one point that are fueled by his opiate addiction.
Yeah, what I like about that scene is it plays with what is the show and what is reality.
Yeah.
In ways that, by the end of it, you kind of realize, oh, what we're seeing is, because we get flashbacks to things that didn't happen or happened very differently, and you kind of realize, oh, this entire episode is us experiencing this from BoJack's perspective.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the entire episode from BoJack's perspective, and it's an interesting way to have done that, to just kind of present his delusions while being high as reality, while presenting reality as his view of the show. So I thought that was a neat little trick they did, and I liked it, and that again is kind of our moment of BoJack again screwing up the world around him.
Anything else about season 5? I liked this season. I thought they were really fun episodes, but
I think, is season 5 the one where we get the sex robot as the...
Yes. We also... Hey, hang on. This is another one where I want to remember to make sure we talked about. Free Churro. This is the entire bit, the entire episode is his eulogy.
Yeah, okay, so let's do the sex robot first, because it's played purely for gags.
So as I said before, this is a series of dildos on springs and a teaching spell or whatever.
Yeah, speak and spell. Yeah, and it does nothing but say these horribly sexual things, and Todd makes it, and they kind of go, and Princess Carolyn, who he's living with at the time, he's crashing on her couch, and she kind of goes, Todd, you got to get rid of that. So he goes to throw it outside in the garbage, and some other studio executive walking by hears it say something and goes, hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you come with me? And then he just slowly, saying all of these unbelievably offensive things, makes his way up the corporate ladder of this, only to, at the end, finally fall apart after he runs low on battery power. And, as an intern is leaving, he says, low power, and then she just immediately begins connecting all these unconnected dots about how this high-powered man is insulting her as a woman. And it's this really glorious lampooning of Me Too.
Yeah. Because
it doesn't actually make fun of anyone who actually deals with those kinds of things. But it does kind of point out that, wow, all of a sudden you want to talk about this? And it also makes fun of everyone who was willing to tacitly go, there's no illusion about I forget what the robot's name is, Sexbot McCree or something. There's no illusion here about what's going on. So, again, to kind of relate this to the social condition they're making fun of, there were jokes about the Hollywood casting couch for a long time that we all knew were rooted in reality.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, so just kind of pointing at some of the hypocrisy there, and then we get, the end of that particular character as Todd, in a play on Mice and Men, takes him out behind a tree, just shoots it.
Actually, before we get to Free Churro, we also got to talk about Diane's trip to Vietnam and our new character on the show, Pickles.
Ah, Pickles. I hate her.
Why?
So much.
I thought she was a fun character.
I could not deal with her, especially as her experience, as my time with her wore on, she just gets more and more the insufferable.
Well, I mean, she's used as a device to point out that Mr. Peanut Butter, maturity-wise, is stunted. And, somebody else points out that he continually surrounds himself with young women because that's where he is mentally. Yeah. And though he is middle-aged and should be beyond this,
he's
the women in his life outgrow him.
Yeah, he's about as old as BoJack. They are, again, not the same age, but they're roughly contemporaries.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the gap between BoJack and Mr. Peanut Butter is less than the gap between you and me, and we're about 10 years apart. So yeah, he's no, the women in your life, they outgrow you, man, and it leads to some nice development for him later down the line.
I liked the episode of her in Vietnam. The guy that she meets who assumes she can't speak English. That was great.
That was funny.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring those two things up. I thought the Vietnam episode was handled really well. In as far as Diane kind of struggling with her own depression and her own issues with the marriage falling apart. Diane is pretty. By the time we get to seasons 5 and 6, Diane is pretty unhealthily depressed. Yeah, I think she's. She has become jaded since season 1, and she's sort of seen the futility in the fight. And she's just trying to find a reason to get up in the morning. And that's a lot of her story in the last 2.5 seasons or so.
Well, and then how she winds up coping with depression, and the fact that Diane winds up being a really great represent. They use her to talk about what so many creative people struggle with when it comes to their own depression. And I mean, we can talk about that a little bit more when we get there, but yeah, I like her arc a lot.
Yeah.
And then the free churro episode, which is, again, I love this show because it's willing to play around with what you can do on television. Can you just throw a single character on the screen and have him deliver a 25-minute monologue that is the eulogy of his dead mother?
Well, I mean, so a little ways back when my daughter was having to learn about monologues in her musical theater class, I said, I told her that, a monologue is more than just staying up there and saying a bunch of words. It's more than just kind of reciting a paragraph. And I said, the best monologues are the ones that weave a story in and of themselves. There are highs, there are lows. If you deliver it in the same tone and intonation and inflection, you're going to lose people. And the one that the one that I always like to show people in terms of what makes a great monologue is Paul Heyman the SmackDown Before Survivor Series.
Oh, when he comes out and just lampoons Vince McMahon and then calls Taz a fat color commentator or not even a good one.
Yeah. There's a narrative there.
It is Heyman's airing of grievances. I hate you, Vince, for what you did to me, for what you did to ECW. You took everything from me, and I am going to come hell or high water because either I'm going to lose and you fire me, or I'm going to win and then I never have to see you again. You will you will experience my pain, sir.
You took everything from me, and my greatest pleasure in life was that I was able to turn your kids against you. And now it comes to it, and we'll have this battle at Survivor Series. But the way Paul Heyman does it, I think, is a classic example of what makes a monologue great. And if you need another example, it's Free Churro. Because it isn't just... He doesn't even spend the whole time talking about his mother. He does a good solid 5 minutes on the common niceties of everyday non-animalistic society. A woman found out that his mother was died and gave him a free churro. And it was like the nicest gesture he'd ever received. And he just, and he talks about that compared to the woman who birthed him. And this is as good as any time to talk about his parents. Because we've sort of not talked about it for a while now. But so, going all the way back, Cracker Jack, who is his grandmother's son, goes to war and dies. And it affects the mother to the point where her husband has her have a lobotomy after she puts the daughter in danger. And, of course, the daughter is BoJack's mother. So now it is just it is a sad commentary on how badly understood mental illness and the grieving process used to be. That lobotomies like that, it's portrayed. First of all, it is a horrible thing, but let's not pretend that it was uncommon, especially if we're talking contemporarily to World War I. So, 19 teens. There's a lot of in the episode where they deal with all that, there's a lot of really funny lines about how ice cream is for men. And it's just like what the expectations are of a woman. And they're obviously playing with a lot of tropes, but some of it's just really biting and really funny. Anyway, so Cracker goes to war. He dies. This puts the BoJack's grandmother into a state of depression for which it is intolerable in this era, and so her husband has her lobotomized. This all affects BoJack's mother. Later in years, BoJack's mother, who is betrothed to another high society boy, decides to run in the opposite direction to the bad boy of the neighborhood, who becomes BoJack's father. She gets pregnant. They try to build a life together in San Francisco. The mother is resentful for not being kept in the niceties for which she had grown accustomed to. The father is resentful because he wants to write the great American novel, but actually has to get a job to take care of his family.
Well, not only does he have to get a job and take care of his family, it's not that he's a bad writer, but he's not that good.
Well, and the other part of it is he doesn't just get any job. He has to take a job at the sugar factory that from whence this family got their money.
Yeah.
So he feels beholden, and there's a lot of resentment. That resentment breeds outward from both. There's a lot of drinking that happens in the home, a lot of benign and sometimes malevolent neglect of BoJack.
A lot of verbal abuse.
Being told incessantly by his mother that he's no good and the source of all her pain, James.
Again, we have to get the joke in, but I believe at one point she does actually tell him that.
Yeah. But even the father, at some point, I've never been as abrasive or as mean as BoJack's father is, but there were a couple of times when he's riding with BoJack in the car, and there's a couple of things he says to where, out of frustration, I've been like that with one of my kids, and I was like, woof, that makes me feel really guilty. And rightly so, because it's kind of seeing that, not one of my better moments. And again, I wasn't even approaching some of the stuff that happens here, but just as an example of something I've been known to do, he says something to BoJack, and BoJack doesn't show any gratitude, and he fucking goes, "You're welcome." Just that frustration that your child isn't perceived to have been grateful for whatever benevolence you've shown upon them, rightly or wrongly. And I'm like, that hurts. That's rough.
Yeah. So, I love the monologue itself, not just Will Arnett's delivery, which is fantastic, but again, the journey it takes us on. Like you mentioned, a good monologue is not a dry recitation of words. It's the story, it's the narrative, and BoJack coming to grips with the death of his mother, who...
Well, it's the dichotomy. This woman, he hated this woman, but you always love your mother. Right or wrongly, for all their faults, warts and all, you always love your parents, if you happen to know them. And he's lost his father in years past, who was verbally abusive to him and neglectful. And he's now lost his mother, who is verbally abusive and neglectful. But God damn it, they're his parents.
Yeah.
And that's the struggle.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, the line that kind of runs through this, if you're BoJack, he repeats something that his mother said at his father's funeral. Apparently, like, the sum total of her eulogy for his father was, "My husband has died and everything is worse."
Yeah.
And he kind of comes to, at various points in his monologue, "My mother has died and everything is worse." And it is a genuinely glorious bit of television that you don't get a lot of stuff like that. The 20-minute episode that we got there, it is great. Yeah. And everyone involved deserves kudos. The decision to just go, hey, we'll have one episode that's literally nothing but a monologue in 2018, this would have been, and that's going to be our episode of this show. Like, who does that? But it works, and it's, again, kind of brilliant.
So, BoJack, of course, is in the throes of opiate addiction, and that is where we open in season 6, where he checks into... He
checks in at the end of 5.
Okay. We open in season 6, he's in rehab. And he's dealing with Sarah Lynn's death, his career, his troubled childhood, all of it. And what I liked about this season, as somebody who works in the mental health field, is how people cling to rehab, inpatient therapy, the structure that it provides. We talked a little bit earlier about how BoJack has lived in a world where all the hurdles were cleared for him, and how it corrupted his ability to relate to people and the world around him. And now, it's led to this, and the therapeutic process, specifically a structured institution like an inpatient rehab, attempts to put those things back into place so that you can at some point function later on. And what happens with a lot of people is they, like the 12 steps, people talk about getting addicted to the 12 steps. They get addicted to rehab because they need to put something. Addiction's not a zero-sum game. If you give up booze, you have to find something to replace it to one degree or another, or you just sort of become untethered and become adrift. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Again, anything that you are addicted to takes up a tremendous amount of your time and your energy and your focus, and it's a giant part of your life.
So when I say people become addicted to rehab, that it goes beyond using it for the structure that it's supposed to provide, where it was absent before. It becomes people's lives. That's not what it's meant for. People who find religion in the absence of whatever it was they gave up, or after some form of tragedy, and
is the trope of like, oh, that's all that person talks about. It's the trick with rehabilitation is finding that in between point of allowing things into your life to provide structure without it absorbing your entire life. You still need to function as a multifaceted human being and not just somebody glomming onto one, the orbit of one thing or another. You with me so far?
Yep.
And so, of course, because BoJack is a classic addict, he becomes like obsessed with rehab after a fact. Because he craves the structure. And when that structure is sort of imposed on you, and you don't have to make decisions for yourself, and you don't have to think for yourself, and it's just activities and sharing, and you don't actually have to do any living, it can become very soothing and very addicting in and of itself, which is exactly what happens with BoJack. And of course, he ruins the therapist in the process.
Yeah, well, if I might quote that particular character, not a therapist, because that's a legal that's a legal and medical definition. I like that they kind of don't hesitate to lampoon some of the rehab culture that we have in America.
Mm-hmm.
Where, you have these two big multi-million-dollar facilities like right next to each other, and they're kind of competing for clients, and you get some that are like, no, we don't actually believe in the 12 steps, and like, sure, because never mind, that's like the only system that's been proven to consistently work in rehabilitation. But, hey, people want something else, and there's a buck to be made. What are you going to do?
Well, it also talks about how people self-sabotage in rehab. You have the woman who's sneaking in vodka and things like that. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it, no pun intended. And a lot of the first year of learning how to be a therapist is you can't be working harder at this than your client.
Yeah, and there's a great line that kind of, for those who might be curious about, the allure of alcohol or other kind of dependencies. There's a line at the end when this counselor who has initially inadvertently, like BoJack just has a bottle of vodka masquerading as water that he took from someone else, but didn't actually turn in. And this counselor winds up getting it by accident. And falls off the wagon because he's, an addict himself. And at the end of it, he's just like, BoJack kind of explains what happened, and he just somewhat hungover, drunkenly goes, "You ruined me, BoJack. I want you to remember this." And BoJack's response is, "I'm sober now. I remember everything."
Ugh, that's a biting line. Oh, man.
Yeah, that's one that like, nope, I get it.
So this season sort of wraps up the entire series. This is the one where you have the reporter doing like an over-the-top, like Southern antebellum kind of bit. And this man who's following her around who's also doing kind of a weird character.
The two old world Southern reporters.
Yeah.
Always in cahoots. Always like those are and they are very deliberately this, by the way. The people that you just kind of want to roll your eyes at every time they start bickering and go, just sleep together already.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but I mean this over the top like accent that she's doing.
Oh yeah, she's very, very Southern. She's in a wedding gown the whole time because she's perpetually putting off her wedding after being engaged to this fabulous human being that she winds up leaving.
At one point, they actually cut to her at her wedding, and it's just like, "Why are you talking that way? We're from New Jersey."
Yeah, it's so great.
But they are trying to track down what happened in the last days of Sarah Lynn's life, and so of course this brings them to BoJack. And in following BoJack, they're the ones that recognize the pattern of benign abuse of the women in his life, which is dealt with an interview where he tries to get out in front of it, and he's kind of like let off the hook, and people like...
Well, to be fair, the first interview, they don't really bring it up in that capacity. It's not a softball interview, but it's lacking a lot of the information that the chinchilla reporter gets by the time that... Because they do this interview, BoJack has been... he left Hollywood. He took a teaching position at I forget which college it was.
Wesleyan, which is where Hollyhock is going.
He takes a teaching position there. He's teaching dramatics. He's sober. He's kind of away from all of it, and essentially, like, kind of where he wants to be. He's not dyeing his hair anymore. He just goes gray.
By the way, the bits where he goes to a meeting, and he's followed by a student who he's previously told, either you can't act or stop doing the bit you're doing. It's not working for you. And so to get him back, they show up at the meeting and do said bit. It was a really funny gag.
Because it happens multiple times.
Well, it happens twice. And the third time, the girl really went because she needed a meeting. And he runs her off.
Yeah, that was the payoff for that gag.
Sorry, the black kid doing an old man is really funny to me.
Oh, God, because it's so bad.
Yeah.
It's not even a good old man, and it's the one character he has.
I liked a lot of the BoJack at Wesleyan stuff was one of the few times in the series I was actively rooting for him.
Yeah, he's finally turned stuff around. He's gotten away from the mess. He's in recovery. He's contributing something to the world. He's making use of his gifts. This is what you want someone like that to be doing. You're rooting for... You're finally... you kind of root for him, I think, when at the end of season 5. Like, when he's finally realized, no, I've gone off the deep end. Because he doesn't even remember, assaulting his coworker like that. And when he finally, starts realizing just how far gone he is, I think that's when you finally start actively rooting for him. There's other scenarios where you root for him, but it's not because he's a good person. It's just because he's positioned opposite someone else that you really don't want to see succeed.
Sure. But I think also, we love a good redemption story, and he is trying to do his level best to do better for the first time in the entire show.
Oh, he's trying so hard.
In that way, it's a lot like Oz, where you have a character who gets released from Oz, and you're like, well, it's like Poet, for example. Poet's been given a second lease on life. He's written his book of poetry. He has a real opportunity. There's no excuses anymore. He does not have to sell crack. But he sells crack.
No. Well, I think he might have, but what really stopped Poet didn't an old gang rival show up at a book signing of his and he shot him?
Yeah, but that's because he was dealing and selling. He was dealing and using crack.
Another one, if we're talking about characters from Oz, the one that almost made me stop watching. I only kept going because this was after the fact, and I knew I was near the end.
Beecher.
When Beecher gets,
yeah,
that was. What really bugged me about that one? It felt like they only did it because they didn't know how to write that character outside of the confines of prison. Like, you just don't know what you're doing with this guy if he's not here. So you threw him back in there for no good reason. Shame.
And it was as if they didn't know how to do the show without him.
Yeah, it was so bad.
Unlike, say, Orange is the New Black, where the whole last season, what's-her-face, Piper, is out of prison, and they showed her life readjusting to life after prison, whilst going back to the prison to see what was going on there. They're just like, fuck it, Beecher's an idiot.
We don't have the budget to show something that isn't Emerald City, so
yeah, so
sorry, Beecher.
And that's kind of where we are with BoJack, where you're finally at a place where you're like, go, be free, live your life as a teacher in Wesleyan. You've
and
earned it.
Yeah, and his kids, the students like him. He actually does help them. he's not just there for a paycheck. He actually does find a bit of, meaning and purpose in what he's doing. So he takes it seriously.
Yep. And then it all gets, and hence the Oz reference, it all gets ripped out from under him.
Yep.
So, he has the second interview against the advice of
Oh,
Princess
God.
Caroline.
They have the first, I loved this because they have the first interview. And he's nervous about it. Princess Caroline's nervous about it. But the kind of reality the position they both come to is, we have to do it. Let's make the best of it. And it's a hit. He becomes a bit more popular. Again, his image is somewhat rehabilitated. He's very honest about the stuff that he does talk about. And it works. And then the producer of the segment, I believe the Penguin again, goes, "That was great. How about a sequel?" At which point, it's a one-part interview. What? We're desperate for ratings. And then
they'd already sold the ad time.
Yeah, and then naturally the sequel does not go nearly as well.
No, he gets laid bare for all the things he's done, and he's made to look like, men. He ruins it for all men, and all women see him as a pariah. It's the worst of all possible circumstances.
Yeah, and there's that. The other kind of big plot point that goes along in this season. I mean, everybody has some, but we get more with Todd. We learn more about his backstory, about how his mother threw him out of the house because she was sick of him living at home. And he has held that grudge against her for a really long time. We meet his stepfather, where he gets the last name of Chavez from. We get one of my favorite gags because it manages to lampoon both white privilege, the myth of white privilege, and the people who claim it. Because it does kind of exist. When Todd's stepfather and he go to steal a kidney, I think it's his kidney, to then give to his mother who needs a kidney transplant. And they get caught by a security guard, and Todd kind of charmingly buffoons his way out of it. And his stepfather is this hardworking, I believe, immigrant from, I think they even joke about how no one actually knows what country he's from. And they're wind up in the hospital as the procedure's going on, and he's been with Todd through all of these classic Todd shenanigans for this episode. And he goes, Todd, I tried really hard to impart on you my worldview, my ethics, my work ethic, my desire, all of these things, and it never seemed to take with you, and I finally realized why. You're white. It's just easier for you.
Yeah, it's a great line.
And again, it manages to acknowledge, some of the realities of white privilege, such as it is, and also kind of lampoon, again, people who claim it all the time, people who want to make a giant deal out of it. Like, sure, it exists a little bit, but it's not what you think it is.
Also happening through all of this, Diane has moved to Chicago. She's living with her cameraman boyfriend. She tries writing a serious essays about serious things, which then turns into a memoir, which then becomes a
it's a very young
YA detective novel.
Yeah, it's she writes like a Stacey Tran food court detective, and I love the. Let me tell you, I love the arc that Diane goes through here. First of all, her relationship with her antidepressants is one that a lot of creative people who also deal with depression struggle with. She knows what she wants to write, but she feels that so much of writing what she wants to write is tied up in who she was when she's depressed rather than who she is when she is taking the appropriate medication for your serious condition. And that struggle about, well, am I really me if I need these pills, it's a real thing. A lot of people struggle with that. And so I appreciated them talking about it, but I loved that. Again, she has this view of herself as this serious writer, as this person with this particular worldview. And when she sits down to write, what comes out is this very well. It's not this very not serious, very. I don't even know the right words for this. Like young adult material comes out, and she can't deal with that. Like, this is not who I am. This is not what I want to write. I'm not going to do anything with this. And then through circumstance, it winds up getting published, and people like it. And again, I think her like struggle with this isn't who I think I am versus this is who I am and this is what I produce is actually kind of finally summed up and crystallized when the son of her boyfriend has read her manuscript and approaches her about it. And like, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought it was. This isn't what I always, imagined myself doing. But just because it's not what I expected doesn't mean it doesn't have value to people. And I really like that the arc that she goes through in this last season.
All right. We have been at this for almost 3 hours, so let's start to wrap. BoJack. Oh gosh. So BoJack, after the interview and a couple of other details that happen, ends up breaking into his old home, which has been sold because he was broke and he was being sued, and he ends up
overdosing and falling into his pool.
Yeah, overdosing and falling into his pool. There's a whole episode kind of dealing with his processing of his past.
Yeah, there's one that's it's just his brain dying, basically.
Yeah. Which is like, that's like a variety show is how
I was really expecting, I've said this to you and I'll say it here, I really expected him to be dead. I thought that was the way they ended the first half of season 6. My genuine thought was this is going to essentially end with his suicide. Whether that's, deliberate or whether that's, weapon related or he goes on a bender to kill himself or whatever methodology. He's going to die by the end of this.
Before we proceed, so we can wrap this up, this is also the bit that gives us Judah singing to Princess Carolyn and admitting that he loves her, which was such a sweet moment. And
I love that episode so much because he mentions in passing he's not her assistant anymore. He has some other. He's a vice president of something or other.
Yeah, they found like it ended up meeting like some legal legalities that needed meeting, so it was just easier for her to give him a title. So he's like chairman of something.
Yeah, and he winds up. He mentions in passing that his band is performing that night, and everyone kind of goes, "Oh, why didn't you tell us? We would have made plans to come." And he says, "Don't feel obligated. We're not very good." And they kind of miss each other a few times, but they wind up back at the office together. And yeah, again, Judah is just such a nice, good, genuine person.
Princess Carolyn's been offered the opportunity to run a female-driven part of Turtletop's studio, where Judah is like, "Stop working for other people. You're amazing. Do it all yourself." And and that's when he admits that he loves her and he's singing to her, and she just sort of smiles at him. And of course, the next time we see them, they are married.
This is also the season where Princess Carolyn has adopted a little porcupine baby, who she names Ruthie, and
Todd ends up being the nurse of, which then inspires him to open up a daycare.
All of which goes swimmingly because classic Todd shenanigans. No, he's actually very good about being with this baby and taking care of it because so much of his mind is childlike.
Yeah.
He just gets the baby. This show wraps up in such a very nice way. Again, I've always kind of struggled with the ending of this show because it wasn't what I expected.
Yeah.
And that's led me to kind of...
Well, let me say, BoJack goes to prison for breaking and entering. And when we see
in his own words, officially breaking and entering, but I think unofficially it was kind of everything.
Yeah. And so when we see him, he's months along into his prison sentence. He's doing prison theater, and he talks about how he kind of likes prison for enforcing structure upon him, which I thought was kind of brilliant. But they let him out, and it's sort of a final bow. So there's his final confrontation / ending with Todd. There's
their walk on the beach is great.
There's the last dance with Carolyn, and then there's the final rooftop conversation with Diane, and then the show ends.
Yeah. Now where to start with this? His dance with Princess Carolyn is great, especially if you're one of those people who's had someone that you maybe were romantically involved with, but it didn't quite work out that way. But you maintained a genuine kind of closeness and friendship and kinship.
You have been both bad and good in each other's lives, but you cannot imagine your life without that person.
Yeah, that is very beautifully represented there, including the gag that this is a nice wedding, Princess Carolyn. Oh, it's not the wedding. We had that 3 weeks ago. This is just for the public. Because of course it is. Him and Todd, their conversation was... It's one I almost I need to revisit because...
Well, he talks about the hokey pokey. And he says the hokey pokey isn't what people think it is. And he's talking about, and then you turn yourself around. And it's the idea of you have to do the self-work. That yes, you may have made a lot of bad decisions and hurt a lot of people, but you can always turn it around. You can always try harder and be better.
Yeah, I really did love that bit from Todd because Todd has so many great lines throughout this series.
Well, it was meaningful because so much of the show is BoJack saying, "I'm never going to change, and I'm never going to do better."
Yeah. So to have this guy who he was very close with Todd is one of the few people that essentially cuts BoJack off, and then they are able to reconcile a little bit down the road. Most people that tell him to F off, they never really reconnect. And Todd and he do, and it's nice.
Were you sad that BoJack and Diane didn't finally get together at the end?
No,
I kind of was. I think it might have been too saccharine, too perfect an ending. It might have been, I think about the end of Cheers, where at the end Sam's not with anyone. He realizes that his love is the bar. He says, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." And not that I needed that, but this, I almost feel like I wanted BoJack and Diane to be together because they so clearly belong together. And that's evident, I think, from the first season. On the other hand, I think them sitting apart and the camera angle to where you just see them from the shoulder up and they're just sort of side-eyeing each other was like the perfect representation of this show.
Yeah. I think there's a line from BoJack to Diane in that final encounter between the two of them. Because Diane at this point has married the Buffalo, and they're living together. Yeah, she shows off the ring.
Okay.
And they've moved. Where did they move to? Because they weren't in Chicago anymore.
Houston,
that was it. Thank you. And BoJack says to her at one point, you've kind of settled down. You're on meds. You're happy where you are, clearly. But he asks her, do you ever miss the mess? And I think that's kind of what BoJack's life, and again, he's self-aware enough to know it. That's what a lot of this show was wow, what a mess. And it feels that way. There's an odd thing about that the show does, and I commend it for it. Anytime the show is showing stuff that does not take place in Hollywood, it feels differently. than stuff that takes place in Hollywood. And I think, BoJack and Diane, if there was a point in time when they should have gotten together, it would have been a catastrophe. I mean, I'm with you in the sense that I kind of want to see what would have happened.
Well, when I say they belong together, they were clearly in love. How well that would have worked out and how loudly their love would have exploded in disaster can be debated. But I always got the sense that the show kind of played with that Sam and Diane sexual chemistry that's there but never acted upon. Well, Sam and Diane eventually did, but you know what I mean. That you never watched the show, but for a long time there was.
Hang on, I have watched Cheers.
Not Cheers, The Big Bang Theory.
Oh, that one. No, yeah, I'd very deliberately avoid that. Okay,
well, for a long time before they finally broke the ice and actually put them together, Leonard and Penny, had that that chemistry between them, but they couldn't act upon it early on because that was the whole thing of the show was this guy's longing for her. And they just kind of kept missing each other until they finally gave up and moved on to other things. So I feel like that's a lot of the show up until the last season or two where, BoJack and Diane, there was something always there between them, but it was never really acted upon for one reason or another.
Yeah, I see what you're doing there, and yeah, it's an interesting. How do I say this? They do some interesting stuff with it. This show begins essentially with BoJack and Diane's meeting, and it ends with there's again kind of a subtly little heartbreaking bit of dialogue as they're on that roof together at the end when BoJack just kind of goes, wouldn't it be crazy if this was the last time we ever spoke to each other? And given that, again, I tend to think of this show as our look into this world only as that begins when they meet and ends when they part. So they probably never did really see each other again after that.
Probably not. So, what? Give me like 50 words here. How, if you got the chance to write the ending, how do you do Princess Carolyn's fake wedding? Do you do what do you do? Like, how do you write the end of BoJack Horseman?
I don't know.
Well, what did you want?
It's not so much what I wanted; it's more what I expected.
What did you expect?
I expected him to be dead. When we get that penultimate episode, I fully expected him to die. And the last episode would then be, I wouldn't even have done his funeral. I would have done, we would have done the same kind of time skip we did, but the opening kind of like montage is the aftermath of his death, is his funeral, is that stuff. And then our closing bit is that same time period skipped forward, and we catch up with all of the relevant players again as they kind of intersect one last time, either at a memorial or something like that. And we see that they'd all probably still be in about the same places in their lives. But, talking about small remembrances of this person who was such a big part of their lives. I don't know. I mean, again, I don't know that it would have worked necessarily the same way that this one did.
Mm-hmm. My problem with BoJack being dead is it gives him an out for all the shitty things he did, and he never really gets his comeuppance. I like that he went to prison, and I kind of like that he found peace there, and he's able to not necessarily make amends, but have those last conversations with those characters. For such a dialogue-driven show, I think the writers gave us what the show needed in its conclusion.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was just so wildly different from what I was expecting that it did kind of throw me for a loop, and it's still one I'm figuring out I'm figuring my way around it when I think about it.
I think if I were to write it differently, I might have done a time jump, and he may or may not be dead. But the show is a documentary about the life of BoJack Horseman, and the documentarians are talking to Todd and Princess Carolyn and Diane over the course of the episode. Who was BoJack? What were the last days like? Things of that. And then we kind of iris out, and then we kind of open to Heath's somewhere. And, it's just sort of, the camera's just still on him, and he's kind of on his porch. I almost wish, for this to work, I kind of wish he hadn't wrecked the house. The old Sugarman Ranch. Because that's where I pictured him at the end.
You could argue you could still put him there and just have him had it rebuilt by that point or something.
But maybe there's a for sale sign, on the neighbor's house because he's no longer there, and it's just the last minute or two is just a quiet shot of BoJack in the chair facing away from the camera. After all these people have said, who was BoJack and what did he mean to them? That's how I would have ended it.
I like that. Some you could do like almost an A&E biography kind of bit, some play on that. That's what everyone's been interviewed about, and if I'm kind of playing off of your ending there, I would have BoJack have contributed to it, so he gets. So that last kind of shot is.
I would have had him do it have those scenes in prison.
Yeah, all this is like they have archived footage from that, and we see him on the porch at the end, and we get just the audio kind of montage of everyone's thoughts, and the last one is whatever he has to say about himself, and then we close with again that same kind of way they closed this, which is just him which is a very quiet camera on face scene for 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm. After all is said and done, I'm okay.
Yeah.
So, you got to talk about BoJack Horseman. You got to talk about it with me. How do you feel?
I feel good. How do you feel?
I thought this was a good show, minus my slowly developing COPD. And my liberal use of the mute button tonight so as to cut some of the coughing out. No, I thought this was a really good discussion. I thought it was worth the roughly 3 hours we put into it. It's 6 seasons. It's a lot. There was a lot to discuss, and I didn't want to do like my usual 1 hour, get it in, just the tip, get it out, move on, kind of TV parties. I thought this deserved a really long form discussion, but we're at 3 hours. I'm sure anyone listening to this is like, "Holy fuck, when is this over?" So,
again, this is a meaty show that deserves. That deserves this. You're correct. It deserves a little more long-form discussion. It deserves to be taken seriously because it takes the material it discusses seriously.
No, I totally agree. So, we did a whole bunch of plugs on our Gentleman, Damn You Hollywood. Just a very, very quick recitation. We reviewed The Gentleman. Tomorrow, Pat and I are supposed to do our Cassius Clay episode. Next week is Batman versus TMNT, WrestleMania 36, In This Moment, Mother. Tomorrow, or today, whenever you're listening to this, I'll be doing a solo review of Heaven Shall Burn. Robert certainly has his 401 Ground and Pound radio show podcast, which goes up almost nearly every Sunday. Who knows when we're getting MMA back? If it was up to Dana White, he'd be doing
still
it right
be running.
now. But hopefully cooler heads and saner heads will prevail. And so the next time, Robert and I will be getting together. Are you coming on the Agretsuko or no? Because you expressed some interest in that.
When is it?
The 14th.
Keep me penciled in to be on it, yeah.
Okay. So quite possibly, definitely maybe, we'll be joined by Robert Winfree, David Wright, and Sean Garmer of the network that we share, the W2M. So just to, I'll let you give the final word.
plugs and or whatever else you want to tell people, and then we'll close up shop for the night.
Again, watch BoJack. It's a great show. I can't stress that enough if that hasn't come through to this point. A great show. I enjoyed every minute of it, and that doesn't necessarily mean I was happy through all of it, but I was very, very enriched by the experience, I think. As for my plugs, I have a Dominic Cruz career retrospective and skill study. If you're an MMA fan, feel free to listen to that. Mark and I talked about The Gentleman yesterday. You can listen to our review of that if you're interested. There will be a Ground and Pound episode this coming Sunday. I didn't do one last Sunday, and then about 8 hours later, early Monday morning, news broke that Tony versus Khabib is definitely off. Because I would have talked about that if that had been official when we were supposed to record, but Sylvie. So this coming Sunday, we will talk about, whether that's me and Jeff or just me solo, we'll be talking about, again, UFC 249 losing its main event again. The UFC still, as of this recording, still stubbornly insisting that will be a card. It's not going to be a card. Give it up. And talking probably a little bit about John Jones' troubles again. Ugh. And, I mean, what do you want me to say at this point?
Nothing. I want to go watch Dark Side of the Ring.
What's the episode?
New Jack. I need to go watch New Jack try to kill Vic Grimes.
You would want to watch that.
I would.
In any other news that's come out, I think Valentina Shevchenko announced she had an injury and was off the 251 card. So, any other news that breaks, the usual drill. We'll hash out a show for you guys on Sunday. And then, all the stuff from next week, still currently on the schedule. So, hopefully it stays there.
Yep. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us on this long-form review of BoJack Horseman. I am glad for having seen it and very appreciative of Robert for talking about it with me. We'll see you soon. Be well, be safe, and behave.